everybody. Happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today is Monday, June 6th. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm very, very excited to be here with you today. We have a great show on tap for you. And then after the show, we're actually going to start live streaming from the RSA show. So I'm very excited about that as well. But on today's show, we do kick things off with a conversation between Mitch Ashley and Anusha Iyer. Anusha is the CTO and co-founder of Korsha, and they talk about API secrets and why PKI doesn't really cut it these days when it comes to cybersecurity and secrets being leaked in CI pipelines. It is a great conversation, and they talk a lot about the ways in which organizations can use API secrets, but do it in a very secure fashion. So it's a great conversation there. After that, Mitch speaks with Cody Chamberlain, who is the head of product over at a company called NetSpy, and they discuss the 3 key elements to implementing a successful data breach communication strategy, which includes an incident response plan, open communication, and transparency, and how the 3 work very well together to ensure that when a data breach does happen, and we all know it's going to happen, that the company will be able to get back on its feet sooner rather than later. Good stuff there. After that, we bring you a brand new segment here on Techstrong TV. It is called Techstrong TV Today, and it is going to be a regular segment here on the show with kind of a rotating panel of hosts, depending on who's around and who's able to chat and who wants to chat. But in this one, it is basically a roundtable type conversation that we have about news of the day and how it impacts the IT sector. And really, it would be of interest to folks such as yourself. So we talk about the topics of the day. And in this one, Alan and Mike Vizard and I talk about 3 very, very interesting and compelling products. Issues. We talk about VMware being acquired by Broadcom and what that means for the industry, and as well as the growing proliferation of pandemic technology and whether it's here to stay, and then also whether cloud-native application adoption is matching the hype, and cloud-native in general, whether that adoption is matching the hype. We really enjoy having these conversations. We do it in the hallway all the time, so we thought we'd go ahead and just put them on tape and bring them out to you as well. So keep an eye out for Techstrong TV Today. After that, I'm back and I've got the news headlines for you. And then I have a conversation with Dan Clark, who is the president of Trujillo. And we discuss the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Framework, which was recently updated to version 2.0. And it now requires all contractors in the defense industrial base that handle controlled unclassified information to certify if they want to continue working with the Department of Defense. But there are some nuances that defense industrial-based contractors must be aware of. So Dan and I discuss what some of those are and what organizations that are working with the Department of Defense need to keep in mind. Good stuff there. After that, I have another conversation. This one is with Nathaniel Quist, who is the principal researcher at Palo Alto Networks Unit 42, and we discuss some of the findings from the Unit 42 Cloud Threat Report that analyzed more than 680,000 identities across 18,000 cloud accounts and more than 200 different organizations to help them understand their configuration and usage patterns, and there were some really interesting findings in this year's Cloud Threat Report. So if you're working in the cloud, and really who isn't these days, definitely want to check out this conversation. After that, I've got the webinars preview, and then Mitch is back with a couple more interviews. The first one is with Aaron Newcomb, who is the Director of Product Management over at Sysdig, and they discuss Sysdig Advisor, which is a new offering from Sysdig, and it simplifies and accelerates Kubernetes troubleshooting. It they discuss some of the many benefits of Sysdig Advisor, how it operates, how it can help save troubleshooting and time to resolution. Interesting technology, and what Sysdig is doing in this space is really kind of fascinating. So you definitely want to check out this conversation as well. After that, Mitch talks with Blair Lyon, who is the head of cloud over at Linode, and they talk about the 2022 Rise of the Alternative Cloud report that Linode authorized along with Techstrong Research. And Mitch Ashley, actually, as part of Techstrong Research, took part in that, pulling together that report. So they discussed the findings from that, and really another fascinating survey and results. So want to check that one out as well. Again, if you're in the cloud, and who isn't? So after that, we've got the third Mitch Ashley interview. This one is with Stephen Chin, who is the VP of Developer Relations over JFrog. And they discuss JFrog's announcement from the recent KubeCon event for the, what is it called? It is called Persia. It is a new open source decentralized package manager project. This is a great, great technology. Multiple companies are running infrastructure for Persia that it actually supports a wide-scale peer-to-peer networking or network using a libp2p. It is a great technology, certainly a huge step forward for package managers in general. So you definitely, if you're doing DevOps and are having issues with package managers, definitely check out this conversation as well. And I think that actually wraps up today's Techstrong TV lineup. It is a good one, folks. Lots and lots of great conversations. And I'm hoping especially that you will enjoy Techstrong TV today. And we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. Kicking off today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we've got a conversation between Mitch Ashley and Anusha Iyer, who is the CTO and co-founder of Corsia, and they discuss API secrets, such as keys and tokens and certificate. We all know they're used as a way to identify machines and broker access between them, but in today's cloud-native environment and CI pipelines, some of that stuff gets leaked, and so Anusha and Mitch discuss why PKI just doesn't cut it, and it's a fascinating conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I have the great pleasure of being joined by Anusha Iyer, who is co-founder and CTO with Corsia. Welcome.
Thank you, Mitch. Happy to be here.
Great to be talking with you. Good topic, too. Before we get to that, I'm excited to talk with you. Would you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and tell us a little bit about your company, Corsia?
Sure, of course. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm the CTO and co-founder of a startup in the DC area. And my personal background has been pretty much in the cybersecurity space in the DC area for about 20 years or so. Had some stints at the Naval Research Lab, working in the realm of DARPA programs, and jumped out a few years ago to start Corsia with a friend of mine.
Awesome. Yeah.
Corsia is it's an API security company in the DC area. We've been around for a few years, just closed a Series A round, and we're in the space of essentially API identity and access management.
Okay, that's a hot topic too, of course. So thank you for introducing yourself and the company. Our topic is talking about APIs, API security, but also PKI. Now, I mentioned to you beforehand that I have a little bit of background in PKI, managing business for very large PKI ecosystems that were in existence for almost 20 years for cable industry and for other industries. So, PKI has been something that's kind of been around for a while, and of course, widespread use everywhere. And we're all waiting for quantum computing to come along and break it, but it hasn't yet. And other than that, it's kind of considered pretty solid. But I think you might have some views of maybe it isn't perfect for all situations in API security. Or you tell me what's your view on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. PKI has been around for decades, and absolutely kind of solves a really important problem. I think what we're increasingly finding is that it's fantastic in practice, challenging to get right, or fantastic in theory, challenging to get right in practice, right? It's really kind of the key management, the security hygiene around it. And a lot of those kind of challenges with PKI in general are showing through more and more today as we are looking at hybrid environments, cloud, scale, kind of the proliferation of API-based ecosystems for applications. And suddenly, when we were managing a handful of keys, it doesn't scale when now that has to go up to thousands or ephemeral or, so I think those are some of the challenges around PKI is we probably need to still leverage it as a foundation, but kind of an abstraction layer around it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The fundamentals of PKI, don't share your private key. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen, but it's kind of like, okay, now we get to start over. Are you thinking about it in terms of identity primarily? Or are you thinking of more of security and encryption side of security, or both?
Yeah, great question. So I'm thinking of it more in terms of identity, especially when you're thinking about purely machine-to-machine communication. A lot of that we do essentially leverage PKI certificates, perhaps even keys, tokens, things like that for identity, right? And that's where it kind of does fall short. So that's kind of the issue around PKI, like you said. Don't lose your private keys. But then if that ends up being your identity, it doesn't end up being a very strong identity.
Yeah, don't share it on your device either. Store it there. Yeah. What's interesting when we're talking about machine to machine, we're talking about API, and API economy, API centric software and applications being built. Certainly rely on PKI for a lot of that, and also access management to devices and servers and things like that. But you're right, it gets very complex very fast. And managing all of those keys and doing key rotation, whether it ever really happens or not.
Right.
In my view, key rotation, it really has to be automated, or else, who knows whether you're going to, anytime you have a person touching it now, we have the opportunity for something to not be done quite right, or be put in the wrong place, or something happen. So while it is still secure today, it is a challenge to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It is around meeting kind of this time period of automation and scale that we are finding ourselves in, right? So anytime you have a poor DevOps individual that needs to rotate keys around, say, workloads that are running in the cloud, or machines in a multi-service architecture, it just becomes untenable. So it feels like that's really what's called for, is just the security automation around it to be able to do things like rotation, revocation, and even just visibility into where all of our keys, our service accounts, all of those are kind of distributed and being leveraged from.
Mm-hmm. Are you more concerned about private PKI hierarchies versus service providers, the Digicerts of the world and Cyctigos and any number of folks that have PKI offering? Is there drastic difference in that, because I have seen, I mean, you can go set up your own hierarchy, your own PKI ecosystem, and you're only as good as whoever set it up and knew what they were doing, and those things don't go away. They tend to live a long time, and so you have to constantly maintain it, update the security in it, and it's not a static thing. Versus most of us kind of treat it as static. Let me go to whoever, download a certificate from my Apache server, and I'm good to go. Right, and run off, and I'm done.
Yeah. I mean, I would say my concern is across the board, and it's less about who's provisioning the certs necessarily and kind of what the lifetime is after the fact, right? So one, we want them to be short-lived, but two, I think it's really important for all of us that are setting up these application ecosystems, leveraging PKI, particularly on a machine-to-machine basis, that from the time a cert actually gets provisioned to when it is deployed and used, it can pass through many digital hands, if you will. That could be a CI/CD pipeline, that could be email, that could be Slack. And so all of these end up being vulnerability points. And so, one of the things we're constantly asking ourselves is, if a certificate, particularly used for identity, was stolen, would we know? How quickly can we respond?
How often do we find tokens and keys, et cetera, stored in Git or one of our various CI/CD tools or whatever,
or logs? There's just so many points of vulnerability that it feels like that kind of static approach to identity and authentication is a risk point.
Well, at risk of giving you a softball question, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But so, do we have any other options? Is there a better way of doing this yet? Are we getting to a place where we can start to rethink how we do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some really exciting efforts that are happening in the space to address this problem, right? So certainly approaches like service meshes, where they're moving towards more of a short-lived certificate approach for identity and access management. Obviously, strong key management systems, right? So at least making sure that once they get to the destination, they're stored securely. And then, I would look at dynamic identity and authentication solutions, and maybe that's the short ball. So that's kind of the problem that we're tackling at Corsha, is how can we provide that security layer or security abstraction layer around solid foundations like PKI, so that.
Well, let's jump into it. Tell us a little bit more about how you approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, under the hood, we are effectively leveraging PKI, but really what we're providing is for an API client, let's say, right, is a dynamic identity, and leveraging that dynamic identity to do something that we're all really familiar with on the human world, namely multi-factor authentication for APIs. So making sure that from an authentication perspective, every API call can go with a one-time use changing credential. So not only is your identity changing and roiling over time, but you're assured that credentials don't get, if stolen, cannot be reused.
Mm-hmm. So how does this get set up in practice? Is this a gateway that APIs go through to request, connections, and so it does the connection for them, and you're requesting the certificate? Is it a library that I put into, or a module, or a microservice that I put into my, Kubernetes cluster, my container, or all of the above?
Yeah, great question. It's kind of all of the above. So, we're trying to pull a page out of what we're really familiar with human MFA. And what we do is we try to tightly couple an API authenticator with the client. And that authenticator can take, any number of form factors, depending on kind of what the environment looks like. As you said, it could be perhaps a sidecar in a microservice architecture. It could be a binary on the box. It could be a library if you want that code level integration. And then what that does is, in MFA speak, it gives you something you have. So the machine has this authenticator, and the authenticator manages the identity, manages the MFA credentials. And then in front of the service, we place a gateway or a proxy.
Yeah, that definitely would take care of us trying to manage all of that process and those keys and the handling and, how they get from here to there inside our apps in between the service that's doing provisioning. Are there certain kinds of industries or applications or maybe companies that have been trying to do it themselves and they're like, this is too much, we got to find a better way? Who typically would go to you and say, yeah, we're looking for a better mousetrap here for PKI?
Right. It's really interesting. We've actually talked to a number of folks on the fintech side that have said exactly that. It's like, oh, wow, we did build a mousetrap for this, but it feels like you've got a productized approach to it. So I'd say in that vein, a lot of our early customers are in kind of regulated industries. So think fintech, government. Actually, our early traction was with the US government, actually Air Force. And so we've been working with a number of different groups within Air Force who, it feels like government can be an early adopter, especially in the cybersecurity space. And so I think they are early to recognize some of these vulnerability points.
And, it's interesting. I've worked with government defense also. And when you solve problems for different departments of defense, you usually solve them at scale. So when you go to provide, sell something to the private sector, you've got something that stands up at least to high volume conditions and sometimes some rugged environments. It just depends on what you're doing. Interesting. Are there? I'm curious. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We just we're doing some work with the Air Force Sustainment Center, and so they actually are trying to leverage this for like shop floor machines, like industrial IoT. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we did, is we kind of put our stuff on a ruggedized tablet. And so it's that idea of you're thinking about different conditions and solving for different constraints.
Yeah, I remember providing hardware. What was that? I can't remember the test we had, the FSMA, whatever the test was. You had to go through the heat. And, there's a lot of gauntlets that you go through to get your products into the government. Sure, it's certainly in the Defense Department. Interesting. So is it primarily development organizations that are coming to you? Is it more the security teams that are trying to manage the PKI ecosystem for their software and for their hardware?
Yeah, great question. It seems to be kind of two types of personas within an organization. One is certainly the security teams, like CISOs and folks in the security organization. And then another, I think this speaks to kind of a lot of the digital transformation that many organizations are going through, is more platform architects, platform engineers that are looking at, say, perhaps taking what was traditionally a relatively monolithic application running in maybe on-premise networks and pushing it out to cloud. I think they're recognizing the aperture opens up in terms of vulnerability there a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose the dilemma of, if I'm going with the cloud provider, do I use their services? What if I'm doing multi-cloud or hybrid? And maybe I want to switch. How tied in do I want to be into a certain, that part of the stack of the cloud provider? Is it also, it seems also to me, you can tell me if this is on base or not, also the move to containers and microservices and service mesh and serverless and much more dynamic and porous for that matter, but also API-centric kinds of application architectures is accelerating the growth and the use and the complexity and the management required for PKI. Is that true? Agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. Now because of how nimbly through orchestration technologies like, say, Kubernetes, service meshes, right, serverless, we can deploy out machines. The scale is just at a completely different level, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want a one-to-one identity with a potentially ephemeral machine that could live on the order of minutes, come down, and then a fresh one spins up, we really have to to build that automation right into it from the get-go in terms of the security guarantees that you've got to maintain.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are some of the first steps to tackle if you're sort of caught in the web of complexity of PKI and looking for ways to untangle that and simplify your world? What are some of the first steps, first couple of things people go through in this evolution to finding a better way to do this?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost step is really discovery and assessment.
There's often a lot more out there than we think there is, right? We think we know it, but we don't.
Yeah, exactly. This is actually an effort that we are really excited about at Corsha, and we're starting with providing a self-assessment to organizations where we've got a very simple kind of, call it an API security scorecard, right? So come in, self-assess, and think about where the risk exposure is, right? Whether it is internal APIs, whether it's third party, whether it is cloud or hybrid, and so kind of go through that discovery process. And then what we're looking at is putting together actually an API security assessment tool that we can offer to organizations, potentially freemium, just let them try it out and really go through that discovery process and see how it matches with the assessment, the self-assessment that they took, right? So I think that's first and foremost the initial step.
That's usually the big eye opener, right?
Yeah.
Who knew in a few short years we would be opining for the days of where it was just about secure storage of our keys and expirations and making sure we got it into the machines and we let it go after that. Boy, the world has changed in relatively short period of time, hasn't it? Which creates opportunities for companies like yours, which is awesome.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing adversaries kind of wising up to the problem space as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it's every week, every few days, I'm seeing new breaches around API credentials. Mm-hmm. So I think there's going to be a lot of exciting movement and maturity in the space in the near term.
I'm curious your views on this. One of the things I've been looking into is PKI and the threat it presents in terms of software supply chain integrity. The SolarWinds, of course, we all have heard tons about. And to me, it wasn't, the distribution of code, malicious code, which is part of it. But the fascinating part was getting that into the software creation process, into the CI/CD pipeline, and how that happened. And okay, if you're doing that, now you can start to swap keys or do things that are, insert additional credentials. Now only you can get access to some parts of the code as a malicious attacker. Seems like that's another ways to not only get a hold of the kind of golden handcuffs, but put your own in there too as a malicious attacker.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's kind of another one of the shortcomings of PKI is that ability to ingest your own, ability to affect what's accepted, right? And in the SolarWinds case, what was really incredible to me is how long it went undetected. Right. And so that's where the visibility and control into this, particularly like machine to machine traffic, I think it ends up being somewhat invisible, right? When you have humans connecting into systems, that's a bit louder. It's a bit, there's feedback mechanisms, and we've spent so much time honing that. But when we look at purely machine to machine, API service to API service communication, it's more difficult to get full visibility around. And that's where some of these vulnerabilities just lurk. And yeah.
And when it happens on a much bigger scale too. Yeah. Well, let's do this. I'd love for people to be able to find out more about your offerings. Where can they do that?
Absolutely. Definitely go to our website, so Corsha.com. And if you're interested in taking that, kind of scoring yourself, taking the API security scorecard, you will see a link there, and, totally self-assessed. We don't keep any information, but hopefully it's helpful to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Anusha. Great to be talking with you today.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, Mitch has got another interview. This one is with Cody Chamberlain, who is the head of product over at NetSpy, and they discuss the 3 elements that organizations need to keep in mind when they are implementing a successful data breach communication strategy. Those 3 things are an incident response plan, open communication, and transparency. Certainly, most organizations have at least 2 of those 3, so hopefully they'll pull that 3rd one in and get an effective data breach strategy, because we all know it's just a matter of time before your data is and your network is breached. It's a great conversation, totally worth checking out. So let's go ahead and roll it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, today I have the great pleasure of being joined by Cody Chamberlain. Cody is head of product with NetSpy. Cody, good to be talking with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. Thanks for stopping by Techstrong TV. We're going to talk about data breaches and kind of some good practices to be following, and maybe a little bit of kind of what you're seeing happening in the market, ever-changing landscape that we work in cybersecurity. But before we do that, would you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and tell us a little bit about NetSpy?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, I'm head of product here at NetSpy. I've had an interesting winding journey to my place here. From cyber practitioner at companies here in beautiful Minneapolis, where I'm based, did technical pre-sales, outside sales, and I'm now in a product role. So I've had 4 different careers in cybersecurity. It's been a really enjoyable path to get here. And at NetSpy, we're a leader in offensive security, penetration testing, application security. Our tagline is that we really strongly believe that you're only as secure as your last best test. And my job here at NetSpy is, how do we find that inflection point of technology and talent, right? Like, we have done a really good job of scaling our humans, but how can we continue to scale our expertise using novel and proprietary technologies to really help our customers identify their issues?
We've been doing pen testing and evaluation, white hat testing, if you will, of our networks. And now we think about application security and all kinds of, security landscape doesn't get smaller, it gets larger.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. So tell me a little bit about kind of what you see as sort of the fundamentals we all need to make sure we have in place and practicing. And I imagine, I've gone through pen testing before, and sometimes you realize, we don't have all the things in place I thought we did. So, even the basics, sometimes you're surprised. I thought we had that covered. Maybe not so much.
Yeah, I mean, foundationally, at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're testing, you can test all you want. But if you don't have that good catalog of all of the business capabilities, all the things that are there, you're always just going to by default have a gap. Here at NetSpy, attack surface management is a big push for us. And it's all about, how can you identify your whole attack surface, your holistic attack surface? What are all the things you don't know about? That's really the foundation. Having a really strong relationship across teams, at NetSpy, again, one of our core tenets is, all the work that happens after a vulnerability is identified. It's easy for organizations like NetSpy to say, like, hey, we owned you, good luck. But really, how can we enable our customers? How can we, make them feel as empowered and confident as possible? Because that's really key. As a practitioner, historically, there was always the worst day is when you get a pen test report and now we have to go schedule the meeting with development or our infrastructure partners. And I really hope there isn't a false positive because it's going to totally poison the validity of the test in general. So having those relationships in place with your partners is really key. And having empathy for the fact that the last thing that our partners are going to want to do right now is investigate penetration testing findings, right? They're out there to release fast, release functionality. So having that empathy and understanding like this does have to fall into a process and respecting that process and working with them. I think from a more abstract perspective, those have been the folks that have been most successful, and myself being as most successful in penetration testing programs.
I'm curious, there was a day, maybe it's still present, pen testing was kind of a capture of the flag, right? It's just get in, move laterally, move up sort of exercises. And I'm still sure we still do that. But you brought up an interesting topic, which is it's not just reporting to the network organization, hey, close down these ports, hey, these servers need a little bit better lockdown, whatever it might be. You're getting into API security and application security and access control of and authentication, authorization for microservices and containers, and the stack of what we're dealing with that is potentially that attack surface and what can be compromised is much greater. How do you as a pen testing security organization approach that conversation? Because are you brought in by the software teams, or are you still brought in by network and security teams?
Yeah, I wish there was a science to it because we could probably replicate it a little bit better. But it's really each organization. And where we are at NetSpy, where we really try to work is, really delivering. Usually it's a more focused engagement, right? It's more a team has brought us in. But the reality is because there's so much overlap between networks, between organizations, business units, it's inevitable that we are going to be exposed to other environments. And we focus, really heavily on providing this information. This is what it means to your business, right? Because that just makes it easier for us to identify. We did an assessment of this asset, but here are 4 other assets, right? And they need to be tested as well. And really having that transparency in that process is really key, especially in offensive security organizations like NetSpy that really span that whole thing. We have application experts, we have network experts, cloud. We're able to adapt and very quickly kind of meet those needs, right? I think that's what's been the key for us from an investment perspective is really making sure if we need API experts to step in, if we need mobile app experts to step in. And the reality is for a mobile app, for example, is going to call microservice and API-based functions on the back end. So how can we really focus those expertises on those different aspects and, really deliver that holistic experience. But it is a challenge, right? There's a lot of walls that can be built in organizations like we all experience every day, but it's really just that persistence. And again, I always come back to it. It's just that empathy and that process of really being transparent, leading with integrity, letting the data do the talking, and, you'll break those walls down.
The funny thing, the nefarious folks don't really care about our walls, do they?
No, they don't.
Those are just
they see
easier
it as challenges. Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating. I have friends that do penetration testing, have had businesses in the space, and the breadth and depth of both skills and environments that you're potentially being engaged in, because it's, we think about yes, it's cloud native, but it's also cloud services, multiple cloud providers, multiple SaaS applications. No app is an island, right? Everything is connected to multiple other things, data sources, apps, functionality, security, all kinds of things. So I would imagine you kind of have to do a little bit of a lay of the land, and then, all right, do we have the right team assembled to do the pen testing, right team to do the analysis and meet with the customer and understand what the findings, the context for those findings really are?
Yeah, for sure. It's all about being very specific. The last thing, you want to have in a relationship, whether it's NetSpy or whoever, is ambiguity. We're going to test things, or we'll test your environments. And it's, what does that mean? And it's about being very specific about what the scopes are, what the assets are, what the expectations are, and really having that up front and really well documented so that we can ensure this is exactly what we're doing when we're doing it. It's not uncommon in the industry for people to say, well, you spent 2 weeks doing this, why didn't you do this, right? And that's really what we want to avoid, is that expectation disconnect. In the industry, that happens a lot, right? The things that are sold can be different than what are delivered. And that's really what I think is important from that perspective, is this is the asset, this is the time frame, this is why it matters. Like, you got to remember, attackers have unlimited time frames, time horizons. We in organizations have very finite budgets. So really making sure that we are focused and exposed in the right ways to ensure that the attackers have as much ability to replicate the attackers that have unlimited time and, as much resources as they want to apply to attacking your organization. So those are the things that, we will respectfully challenge and partner with our clients to do, because that's really key. This is what we're going to do today, tomorrow. Having that communication built in is vital to avoid exactly what you had mentioned.
Cool. Cody, one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about is incident response. And I host some panels and do some CISO kind of engagements. And there's a bit of thinking that's shifted, and that is not just prevention with a little bit of response. It's like an equal amount of response, maybe more so response as much as prevention. Not that we're giving up on how much prevention we do, but sort of the realization that we all will get hacked and have been hacked and will be hacked again, compromised in some way. So, you better be really good at responding to it, maybe equally as good, if not better, than your defenses. Are you seeing that kind of a trend, sort of awakening to that, or is it still sort of emerging just in certain corners, certain industries?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that generally speaking, folks are realizing the reality of the threat landscape. The reality is a lot of people are getting attacked. So having that focus on response, I don't necessarily see it's pulling away or cannibalizing, right? A lot of CISOs have been successful in growing their programs. And as part of that, they certainly have had the ability to invest in that response capability, mitigate the damage. How can we insert into the kill chain at a point where we can minimize the impact of a certain attack? That type of thing absolutely has been a big investment. And, it's all about that balance, right? How can we ensure that we're still really focusing on prevention, proactively identifying vulnerabilities, investing in effective technologies that really deliver efficacy in prevention. But the reality is, being that they are going to sneak through, have the plan. One of the things I say a lot is, plan the work the plan. And that's really what incident response is all about. And just kind of having that self-awareness that it's going to be different when it actually happens. It's easy to kind of generate your IR plan, have a Tuesday afternoon tabletop, and it's purely emotionless, right? It's structured. There isn't something happening. But in that instant, when you realize this is a real incident, whether it's on the scale of a breach or a more kind of focused incident, emotion takes over. And I think a lot of us have been in the room when we've seen someone jump to that moment of, oh, it's okay because we have the firewall. Or, hey, it's okay because we have this compensating control, without really taking the time to understand, well, what was the efficacy of that control, and did it do what we thought it was going to do? And after further evaluation, we realized, it didn't work. And you see kind of those situations where companies have to come back and maybe alter a communication, and it just destroys their credibility. So really knowing, hey, when this happens, we have to stick to the plan. We have to trust our internal IR people, or when we fly in the third party, let them do the work, work the plan, stay emotionless, so that we can avoid that very human need to hope for the best, right? That we're all, wired for sure.
Yeah, the happy ears management style doesn't do well.
Right, exactly. Absolutely.
Well, and I think it's also part of that human nature to want to find the answer and then stop, as opposed to we have to keep digging until there's no answers, until we find that, now we're going to test, check every little kind of node of whatever the path might lead to, but don't stop at the first answer.
Exactly.
May go deeper, may go a lot deeper. I'm curious too, software supply chain integrity is a big topic now, and back to, even before SolarWinds, but Log4j and Shell and all the public things that you hear about that are part of our open source software and part of third-party software. How do you approach software supply chain integrity? How do you see your customers starting to tackle that challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big investment to make. You have to do certain levels of due diligence on parties with which you have no authority or control. We've all had third-party risk assessments, but the reality is those assessments haven't provided the level of assurance of like true application or true efficacy of those controls internally. So when, they have, really strict code reviews and those things, that's just an attestation. So one of the things we're seeing a lot and, we're investing in is that real true testing of those types of libraries or all those third-party things that can get pulled into an application. There's some great technologies out there already to help with that enumeration, but there has been a drastic increase in that need, as well as just internally as a service provider, right? How are we providing the level of assurance to our clients that we are meeting that same level of security in the things that we're delivering to our clients? So it's been a big focus here at NetSpy. It's always been a big focus. We've certainly always taken that really seriously, but how do we articulate it better, and how do we provide that assurance better to our clients? And it's something I think that's just going to get more and more, just when you see how effective those attacks were, and especially with how pervasive they can be, it's mind-boggling to think how impactful that can be, especially as they move into maybe the mobile space or these other environments. It just will get away from us really, really quickly if we don't get a good handle on it.
Well, I think that's part of why the open source world has had such a visible impact, because it is potentially everywhere, right? And almost
absolutely. And I mean, we've seen that in environments where Node packages or Python packages had strange content put in there. The beauty of open source is that the more eyes reduce the number of bugs, but at the same time, that openness, it's really a balance that you have to find on, using those to help scale, to build really fast, to build really, high quality, useful software, but balance with the fact that we really need to have more of a due diligence of these third party libraries or open source libraries that we're incorporating into our software lifecycle.
What do you think that we need that we don't have today? Because part of what you're saying sounds like just being more diligent, which is, not a bad thing. Not saying it isn't good, but do we have to have third-party validation of, we just can't put it in the contract and say, sign this to attest that you do this. Okay, well, it's a shared risk model for sure, but you also don't know whether it's really being done. And faith, contractual faith, or maybe consequences faith, but you get to share in those consequences when that happens too. It's not isolated. It's not insulated to you. What else do we need? What do we need to help us advance this further?
Yeah, I think it's just a formality of that very focused process. I think, as I kind of mentioned before, with third-party risk management, software security was a part of that, but it wasn't a very strict focus, right? It was just kind of another tab in a SIG spreadsheet. Whereas now it's really about how do we formalize this and how do we articulate, these are very specific expectations of our vendors. If we're going to be downloading binaries from you, we need very strong control over being able to assess the hashes of them. And how can we really truly understand that the hashes that were generated at a point when you had very high levels of assurance that there was no malicious code in there. So I think that's really the key, is just that focus. As the threat landscape changes, we adapt, and we're in the process of adapting, but it's really that more formalized process. The technology, for the most part, is out there to do those assessments. The service providers are out there to help scale that capability. I think it's just more that process, that rigidity, and the contract language to really push some of that risk onto them to feel that pain of if they don't provide that assurance.
More trust but verify approach.
Always.
Referring back a ways in our US history. Well, Cody, it's been great catching up with you and kind of hearing what some of the current thinking is going around about pen testing and some of the topics we talked about. Where can folks find out more about NetSpy and how they might engage you, or tools or whatever offerings that you have?
Absolutely. At NetSpy, we're a tech-enabled services company. So it's really about taking our experts and helping scale those experts and focus on identifying the real risks to our clients' organization. To find out more, please go to netspy.com. You'll see all of our service offerings, our technologies. I myself am on LinkedIn. By all means, search, reach out. I'm always happy to chat. If there's one thing I can do is talk cybersecurity. So I look forward to that more and more.
Excellent. Cody Chamberlain, Head of Product at NetSpy. Thank you very much. Appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you so much.
Containerjournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. Containerjournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. Containerjournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have Techstrong TV today. This is the inaugural episode of Techstrong TV today. It's going to be a regular occurrence here on Techstrong TV. In this one, we've got Alan Schimmel and Mike Vizard and myself, and we are talking about a couple topics of the day, including VMware's acquisition by Broadcom, as well as whether pandemic technology is here to stay and whether the cloud-native adoption is actually matching the hype. Great topics. We enjoyed having this discussion, and I hope you enjoy it too. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hey everyone, welcome to Techstrong TV Today. This is a new feature of our Techstrong TV network, and in it I am joined by today, it's Charlene O'Hanlon, our Chief Operating Officer, and Mike Vizard, our Chief Content Officer here at Techstrong. And we're going to spend maybe 30 minutes or so talking about 2 or 3 relevant topics that I think you'll find very interesting. We find interesting. And our Crackerjack news team has gone through looking to see what are the big topics, and then we kind of knocked them around and boiled them down to a few here. So first of all, Charlene, welcome. It's good to be on the same screen with you. Mike, same to you, welcome.
This could be a first right here.
I think this is, well, no, we've done podcasts before.
Yeah, but that's not on screen.
No, those are on your own. So this is what it looks like. So before we get started, is there anything either of you want to add to Techstrong TV today and what it is, what it's about?
I think it's going to be very well received, I hope, by the audience. We really have a lot of these conversations in the hallway on a regular basis. Right. And so we certainly have our own opinions of certain topics, and we thought it would be a great way to share them with the audience in this format.
Yeah,
where are all the people who are supposed to be watching from the street?
Well, no, we have to go live out in the street to get them.
Oh, all right.
We could pipe them in here, but it would look like the Gideon episode of the original Star Trek series, which for my Trekkie fans out there, you know what I'm talking about. No one ever died on Gideon, but the planet got so crowded that no one had any space. It was terrible, and they wanted to take some of the blood of the Star Trek crew that had diseases in it that they wouldn't have antibodies to, to kind of reduce the population.
Yeah.
That's kind of terrifying, but
Yeah.
okay.
That sounds a little too COVID-like right now.
Yeah, well, look, I'm a Trekkie. But anyway, just a quick shout out to the new Star Trek series is amazing, but we can't talk about it today. We have a lot to go over. Let me jump in here and bring up number one. You know, I'm just home from Europe, and I was in Valencia, Spain for Cloud Native KubeCon. 8,000 people. I haven't been in the same area with 8,000 people in a long time. I'll admit I was a little freaked out. Some people did get sick, in spite of, I think, really reasonable, beyond reasonable, good efforts by the Linux Foundation. However, though, certainly it was an enthusiastic crowd. The rate of cloud native adoption is going up. But is it going up? Does the reality match the hype, I guess, is the question.
I think, you see all these reports that come out about the rate of adoption, usage, and you got to read them very closely in terms of the verbiage. So like the Trujillo report that came out said 75% of companies are focusing on development of cloud native applications. Well, focusing could mean anything from I'm thinking about it to I'm actually writing something about it. If you look at the numbers that people are bouncing around, the CNCF says there's 7.1 million cloud native developers, but where they are on that journey, nobody knows. Docker claims that there's 14 million developers using Docker Desktop, but are all those people building cloud native applications? Probably not. And then you got to look around and say, well, how many developers are there out there? Well, there's 40 to 50 million. So you got to figure then maybe somewhere between 75 to 80% of the total developer population still isn't building cloud native applications. So there's a long way to go here.
I think also we've got a problem with the amount of the number of developers who actually can create cloud native applications. There's a lot of interest around it. There's certainly a lot of hype around it. But when it comes to actually doing the implementation, I think we still have a ways to go as far as training the developers and helping them understand what exactly, how it's different from, say, developing, regular applications. There are issues around
non-cloud native.
Exactly. Yeah. Complexity, observability, visibility, security certainly is a very, very large challenge for a lot of developers in developing cloud native applications. Not to mention the fact that it's a different environment. And so you have to approach managing that environment much differently.
So I'm going to take a contrarian position of both of you. To me, it's classic shiny trinket, right? And it really is a greenfield, brownfield proposition. If you are building a greenfield application, you are 75 to 80% likely building it in a cloud native Kubernetes environment, whether it be in public cloud, bare metal, serverless, or what have you. You're using a cloud native computing stack if it's greenfield. And there are a lot of developers working in greenfield. If you have a brownfield application or a muddy field, right, a legacy, porting that from, let's call it non-cloud native to cloud native is a mess. Because that's the issue, right? The issue is Kubernetes especially, but all of cloud native, it's not easy. It makes sense once you understand it, but it's not easy to actually implement. So if you're starting fresh on a clean piece of paper, it's a lot easier than if you're looking to port your existing thing. But issues around security, observability, portability, some of the other things you mentioned, Shar, are not cloud native specific. All applications have these things. So, but I do think that the momentum behind this, no one wants to step out in front of the cannonball or that boulder rolling down, that avalanche coming down the hill. And it is an avalanche.
Well, something has changed in the way the IT organizations are operating. Used to be, these so-called full stack developers were driving cloud native and Kubernetes. But there's only so many of those folks. And now the IT ops people are driving more of this conversation because they discovered that Kubernetes allows them to scale up and down the resources being consumed, and they like that. So now they're actually flipping around and forcing the rest of the developers in the enterprise to kind of come around on cloud native and start building all this stuff. I'm not sure, though, that most developers want to be, quote unquote, full stack in the sense that they want to manage infrastructure. They'd rather write code. So I think there's a small subset of developers that want to write and control the whole thing, but I think there's more that would prefer just to write the applications and have an ops team or a DevOps team manage the back end for them. And we're going to have this kind of pendulum swing across the spectrum all over the place.
So I think you bring up an excellent point. When we talk about cloud native, it's not just the code, the developers aspect of it. It truly is a DevOps kind of world where SREs, the ops folks, the DevOps team, and the developers, right? So much of the action in cloud native today isn't around developing application code. It's around observability. It's around on gathering data. Look at the graduated open source projects are from CNCF. Well, there's Kubernetes. There's actually a bunch now. There's like 14 of them, believe it or not. But a lot of them deal with strictly ops. I would put forth the proposition that today's cloud native is as much about ops as it is about development. It's about the stack. You don't, and a full stack developer, that's kind of a misnomer. Because full stack developers, are they really developers writing applications, or are they ops people using, infrastructure as code or code to manage the infrastructure? Those are two different animals.
And they're all over the place. And the bigger the company is, the less likely they are to want to go do that, because they're going to say, I want developers to write code. That's where we add value. I don't want them managing infrastructure. I got a bunch of engineers and ops guys to do that, and it's a waste of time for the developer to do that.
So I think that's something that GitOps plays into a lot, right? Where you can develop your code, put it in Git, and let the DevOps team kind of take it from there, automate a lot of it as well.
What do you think security is? Why do you think it's such a challenge in cloud native environments?
Security is a challenge in every environment. I don't think it's a bigger challenge in cloud native.
But is it a different motion altogether? Is it something that because it is a cloud native environment, we do have to have more developers and DevOps teams involved in the security of shifting it so far left that it isn't even under the purview of the
I think you
team.
could shift security left. It has nothing to do with cloud native. Shifting security left is making developers think about developing more secure code.
Sure.
I think specifically the security in cloud native is the APIs. That's what's, when we talk about cloud native specific security, not just security in development. Cloud native specific security, your issues are coming in because cloud native runs on APIs. And when I first became involved and became aware of APIs, it was I had an application and I wanted to talk to a third-party application, and the way we talked was via an API. It used to be a plugin, a one-off. Now I have an API, and Mike and Charlene and whoever else sitting here could plug into my API and talk to me. But you were foreigners. You were not internal.
Right.
The beauty of that cloud native microservices infrastructure is this isn't a monolith here anymore. This is a series of microservices distributed, being managed and orchestrated by Kubernetes, but they need to communicate with each other. So, and how do they communicate? APIs. Internal, if we could call them internal APIs, make the world go round. And that's the security challenge in cloud native. Every other security challenge in cloud native is pretty much the same security challenge it is developing secure code, making sure your infrastructure is locked down, whether you have a WAF or OWASP and all that kind of good stuff. But the unique API challenge in cloud native is a monster. It's not a monster, but it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And we have several companies that's right. Why we see these API security companies that are, unicorn status before the recent markdowns, right? I don't know if they're still unicorns.
I think it is different in this regard. To your point about APIs, yes, but each API is an endpoint that needs to be secured. And so it's a much more granular play. And I think it forces this DevSecOps conversation that people have been trying to have for a long time.
Yes, but not necessarily the shift left conversation, right? So what I think it's exposed is the difference between shift left security and true DevSecOps, where machine identity, what you're talking about is the micro.
Could you say that again?
Thanks, Siri. What you're talking about is the microservices conundrum, right? Where each one of these services is its own identity, its own, not individual, that's not the right word, but its own entity. Mm-hmm. And that entity needs to be locked down. Yeah. But we saw proliferation of security certificates before cloud native. Right, every IoT device, the IP6 world, every one of them needs a machine identity and a certificate. But I remember we're filming this right before RSA. I remember being at RSA in 2005 saying, you know what, this cloud stuff will never catch on. Of course, security is a problem. Security is much harder in the cloud. Mm-hmm. Bullshit, right? Yeah. We're sitting here now and we laugh. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. We'll laugh about this as well.
Well, I think, to your original question, is cloud native, is that adoption, is it more hype right now? I think we have seen steady adoption over the last few years, and I think we've had to iron out kinks along the way and answer a lot of these questions that I think for some people are still very, they're difficult for certain people to, kind of ken to. Security still is that, we were talking about cloud security for years, and then finally we said enough with the cloud security argument. Now, I think we're very close to saying enough with the cloud native security argument.
Well, I think we said enough about cloud security for a couple of reasons. Number one, the cloud providers stepped up.
Right.
And started providing some APIs and some insight into the security they were providing at the platform level. And then the cloud security industry matured, where we were no longer talking about the firewall at the perimeter or the big honking boxes for $125,000 or $400,000 that we put, right? And we started talking things about identity and cloud gateways and a zero to access control and stuff like this, which were cloud native, not the cloud native we're talking about here, but cloud, purely not cloud wash. They weren't the security we were using there and just put up in the cloud. I think the same thing's happening, right?
I don't agree that the cloud guys have stepped up enough. I think when you hear from them, they're like, oh yeah, our platforms are secure, but everything that you provision and everything
is your problem.
Is your problem. And I think they need to bring a little more to the table to help the developers and the people deploying those applications who are not security experts to have more insight into what those security issues are. And that part is still a little shaky.
So you got three major cloud providers in most of the non-Chinese world, right? Not counting, Baidu and those folks, Tencent, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. You would think if it was doable, one of them would have done it to seize the opportunity against the other. The fact that they haven't, in my mind anyway, and I might be wrong, I don't hold myself out to be the be-all and end-all on cloud security. There isn't a hill of beans of difference between the security we get from Google Cloud to Azure to AWS.
I think you're starting to see the people who have less market share make a bigger deal about security, and they're adding more capabilities. So recently, Oracle's launched a lot of stuff that comes for free now as part of the platform. IBM is similar. They're not trying to charge you extra for the privilege.
What platform is that?
For, IBM Cloud, whatever.
Oh.
This hybrid thing that they have.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's news to me, but okay.
The one that they kind of span across everybody else's cloud.
Exactly. You're right. So security can, and As it should be, right? Security can be a selling feature. But again, fresh off KubeCon, I will tell you that I bet you a third to maybe even 40% of the companies that were there had some security aspect to their pitch, to their play.
Good. I'm glad to hear that security is becoming a much larger part of the conversation in cloud native.
Well, it had security's,
It's
just like
been,
it is.
but,
But it's becoming much larger across everything in tech, right?
Right.
And the other thing why it's becoming big, and we haven't touched on it, it might be on our thing, is the whole software supply chain, which I don't think is necessarily a cloud native specific thing, but software security, software supply chain security, SBOMs and all that is top of mind. I think we're going to see it as a big thing out in RSA next week.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be huge, and I think, all this stuff forces a long overdue issue.
Yep. I just want to say one last word on the whole cloud native thing, though. After being out of KubeCon, at Cloud Native Con, seeing a bunch of demos, watching the usual stuffs and all that, I have to tell you that it's still hard as hell to do. It needs to be made easier.
True.
Right? And there's a lot of companies who are kind of trying to make easier versions. It's still hard.
Kubernetes is an ugly abstraction that needs a better looking abstraction.
Yep, and they're working on it. All right, let's move to point number 2, because we had a good discussion there on point number 1. So big news this past week was Broadcom, all of a sudden a major player in software, acquired our friends at VMware for, well, I had it at 61 billion. It says 69 billion here.
It's 69 now. I think that
Why, the market's gone up. Okay, 69 billion.
valuations are changing.
Yeah, valuation.
Yeah, but I thought they were going down. But all right, 61, 69, whatever.
A lot.
Pick your number. It's a big number. It's a big number. I'm going to let you guys kick it off. What do you think?
I think that I was on the investor call that they had, and it's kind of, when you peel it back, they can't lose on this, right? Either the worst case
Who
scenario,
can't lose?
Broadcom, because the worst case scenario is they just milk VMware just like they do for software licenses. And, Broadcom bought CA, and we all know about the history of CA as the place where software goes to die. So at the very least, they can just
that
milk.
was a different company.
Yeah, but at the very least, they could milk VMware forever. They promised to invest in it. They promised to invest in the core platforms. They're going to continue driving around with Tanzu and trying to make that cloud native shift that we were just talking about and be relevant. They said all the right things. Whether they actually do the right things is a whole other issue, but I think a lot of companies can at least take, from Broadcom's perspective, you can understand why they did it. If you're the customer, you're nervous as all hell, because you don't know if they're going to do the A part of this thing, which is just milk it, or B, actually deliver those investments.
So from a VM perspective, virtual machine perspective, that technology, I know it continues to be relevant. Is it as relevant as it once was?
Well, not proprietary ones, because most of the ones in the cloud are open source. So if you look at all the virtual machines that are used in the cloud, what percentage of those are VMware? Very small.
So this goes to something we were talking about in the previous discussion, greenfield, brownfield, right? So when COVID started, something like 80% of all enterprises had some cloud infrastructure. It was usually less than 10% of their mission critical infrastructure. Now, during COVID, I've seen numbers where, 90% of large enterprises have up to 50% of their infrastructure in the cloud. That still means 50% is not in the public cloud, right? And that 50% not in the cloud is running VMware. So it's a huge base. I think, and mark my words, this deal will be the biggest boom to public cloud that we've ever seen. Because if I'm a VMware customer running this in my data center, I am running to Amazon, Google, or Microsoft and figuring out how I migrate, right? CA is the example. It might have been a place where software went to die, but what Broadcom did to it was ridiculous. I don't want to use bad words that we'll get in trouble here, and we won't be able to play this on Facebook or Twitter until Elon Musk buys it or something. But, Broadcom's attitude was they bought a customer list, and their job was to get their sales team to sell those customers Broadcom hardware at the expense of software. Show me what they did good with CA software.
Yeah. Well, you know, that Broadcom has even said that what they're going to do is they're going to rebrand and operate as VMware. But
just their software division.
But they're going to be incorporating Broadcom's existing infrastructure. So what does
They
that
will
tell
use
you right
this
there?
to sell hardware. And that's all they care about.
It's clear that you could sell more Broadcom processors off that VMware migration, especially to a cloud kind of play. But at the end of the day, this is an expensive way to go accomplish that goal. So you got to ask yourself, am I really going to go spend $69 million to $1 billion to achieve that? Or would there be some other way to go about doing this unless I had a better plan?
My take on it, and again, this is, my take. What's his Hock Tan is the CEO, right? He had access to a huge line of credit, lined up huge financing based on Broadcom's fundamentals. He wanted to buy something else in the hardware space. It didn't go so well. He turned around, he bought CA, I think it was $19 or $21 billion, right? They milked it. They were able to sell some customers. They retained, I guess they retained their mainframe software business a little bit. Everything else got...
DevOps for mainframes, man. They're at the front of that.
No, but they're not. I mean, we talk to the mainframe DevOps teams all the time. You see a lot. You do see Broadcom, but you see BMC, of course, IBM, Rocket, right? But they had a beautiful DevOps portfolio, CA. They did. That's washed away. I think they look around for another brand, especially US-based brand that's ubiquitous, like a VMware fits that bill to the T. And they buy it. Now, the question is, this money comes from line of credit and financing. Interest rates are going up. Someone's got to pay the bill. Couple of things got to happen here. We got to sell an awful lot of friggin' Broadcom hardware, which is low margin business, to pay that bill. We got to make as much money as we can from the existing VMware software without investing a lot of money into continuing to develop it, which probably translates into higher pricing. So if you're using VMware in your private data center, you're probably going to pay more for licensing real soon. Flip side is I'm not going to invest a lot of money into Tanzu or maybe some things that still need that need some capital to make work. I don't know. I'm bearish on this deal, if you can't tell.
I don't think that they can raise prices. VMware tried to do that 3 or 4 years ago, and the customers rebelled. So the customers are probably in a stronger position now than they were then. And I also think as we go forward, I would love to see somebody write the Harvard Business case study that just explains what is it about VMware that it could never operate as a standalone company for very long. I mean, first it was, we're part of EMC, then we got bought by Dell, then we got spun out, and now we're getting acquired again. And
think of the fortunes that have been made. I mean, why didn't we? Why doesn't this happen to us? But you're right. Yeah. It is something, but and I think, Shar, you kind of hit on it early on in the discussion, which is for all of its market share, did VMware stop innovating a while ago? Are they still? I mean, they pioneered.
They got caught short by Kubernetes.
No doubt.
Did not run them over per se, but their model, starting maybe 4 or 5 years ago, was just to build add-ons on top of the hypervisor and try to monetize that. And there was lots of people who were VMware administrators. That's how they identify themselves. And they built a franchise around that. They just didn't see Kubernetes coming out of the left-hand side.
Reminds me of like Sybase.
Oh, God. There's a blast from the past. So what do you think this does for companies that, kind of traditionally have competed with VMware? Like Citrix is one, but also Red Hat.
Well, Citrix is no longer independent either.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of SUSE now?
SUSE.
So, but
Citrix is on its way to TIBCO, I think.
TIBCO is right aboard, the middleware people. You're right.
So, but, what does this mean for that? Does this kind of breathe new life into these alternatives?
Red Hat. That's a whole nother nest to dive into. I don't know, even if the opportunity were presented to Red Hat today, if they're in a position to capitalize on it. I think they have their own.
I think Red Hat has an alternative stack to VMware, but it's not easy to transition to that stack. So I think Red Hat does better.
But it is easier if you're saying, hey, this is a good time to hedge my bets with public cloud and something else. I think Red Hat lends itself to a public cloud environment perhaps better than the VMware solution.
And there are things like KubeVirt that let you encapsulate an entire virtual machine and lift and shift it into the cloud. And that helps. There's ways to get there. It's not going to be.
Yeah, but I think that's a short term. You don't want to lift and shift your way into.
But it gets you out of the lock-in to the on-premise VMware.
Yes.
And then at least you got a step in the right direction.
Well, does this also mean that we may see more organizations then looking more toward open source solutions?
Yeah.
That maybe.
Well, that's the Red Hat, right? Red Hat is open source.
Right.
I think the elephant in the room that I want to see and what happens is this the first in a series of mergers and acquisitions we're going to see? The market's driving down. Companies aren't worth as much as they were. Are we going to see a lot of roll-ups, and will there be this wave of consolidation in this space?
Well, so that brings up the whole what's going on, right, in our markets.
Right.
And look, Mike, you and I have been around the block a few times.
Not me, I just got here, man.
Yeah. But we've seen, all three of us have seen cycles and how these cycles play out. And clearly, part of going down cycles is M&A activity. Things get a little bit more affordable. Cash is king. Stuff happens like that. And so I guarantee you're going to see a lot, right? We're seeing layoffs in tech. We haven't seen layoffs in tech in 15, 20 years maybe, right? So there'll be bargains, there'll be fire sales. The question is there value, right? Is there 61 or $69 billion in value to Broadcom buying VMware? Was IBM's purchase of Red Hat, and I forget what they paid now, 2 years ago or whatever it was. If they had to do that today, did they see the value?
I don't know where the valuations come from, but I would observe this, at least in all my years. I don't think I've ever seen a big company acquire another company that wasn't followed by a price hike of the product that was acquired. And even if it's a small company, first thing Cisco does, they acquire something, price hike comes in like almost within weeks of the acquisition. And I think every company does that to help fund the deal. But I think what people want to take away from this is every time you see a merger and acquisition, it equals price hike for you.
And brain drain.
Yeah.
At the company being acquired. And I think that's another thing we're going to see with this VMware deal is a lot. Look, VMware has a lot of smart people over there, that's for sure. So we're seeing layoffs, we're seeing perhaps people leaving. I think it creates opportunities for companies who maybe have a stronger balance sheet, in a better position to hire some top-rate talent, which frankly has been really hard to come by over the last few years.
Some of them may take the year off. Might be difficult. They're going to sit it out for a year and then they'll come back.
Could be. Could be. All right. Let's move into topic 3. And we got a couple of minutes we can talk. Yeah. Pandemic tech, is it here to stay? So I guess we've got to first define, what do you mean by pandemic tech?
Well, one of the things that, you had to do, I'm sure with KubeCon, one of the things that we are doing with RSA is we have to prove that we're vaccinated. and that we have a vaccination card or we have a negative COVID test.
Well, no, only in the U.S. do you have such a thing as a vaccination card.
Well, yeah.
The rest of the world's gone digital.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
But that is, I mean, that's pandemic tech. So you have to, they download a mobile app, you have to take a picture of your vaccination card, or you have to somehow prove that you're free and clear. And you can't actually attend until you do. So that's one thing, but it also is something like a digital sensor that automatically checks people's temperatures as they walk in the door. The facial recognition technology that was being used to detect whether somebody was wearing a mask, things of that nature. Now we're starting to see a lot of this technology being used in other scenarios that had nothing to do with COVID. It's facial recognition technology, AI detection of body temperature, things like that. There are some companies that are now starting to use that for other purposes. And some of it good, some of it bad. And there have been some conversations around privacy issues related to this technology. And I think that is kind of
privacy and discrimination with the facial recognition. There was a huge thing around, I believe it was around African American facial recognition kind of algorithms and so forth. I think, look, I just came back from traveling to Europe. Everyone in the EU has a QR code that can get scanned from from the agency or from passport control, whatever, that gives you your vaccination status, or if you've got a negative test, or if you've had COVID within the last 30 days or whatever it is. And only us Americans, are trying to figure out how to show that this card that anyone can write on is real. Interestingly, coming back into the U.S., we're now the only country that demands you have a negative COVID test the day before you fly. But as a result of that, so I came back from Greece. Every corner had a store doing the rapid test, and they give you your certificate. Now, coming into the U.S., you didn't need a QR code. It wasn't digital at all. You actually had to show someone a PDF or a picture of a letter that says Alan had a PCR test on this date and it was negative, or a rapid test, whatever, antigen test, and it was negative. Ridiculous, right? I mean, easily dummied up if you really wanted to. But it was so easy and cheap and quick to do, it didn't pay to dummy it up. Unless maybe I was positive and I was looking at it and I didn't want to quarantine there. I would never do that. But, I've been to China before COVID. They were already doing the temperature thing. I got off in Miami and there's a clear sign there that says, we're doing facial recognition for criminal activity. So these things they're mainstream. I don't think you put that genie back in the bottle.
Well, do you think that would have been as accepted before the pandemic and the recognition?
In China?
Well, here in the United States.
It's a 22 to the back of the head or this. Well, I mean, you don't have a choice.
But it's starting to get a little dicier, though, in the sense that we're also trying to figure out who's working and not working. When people are working from home, there's a lot of productivity stuff, issues around that. But then you're into monitoring, and now you're reaching into people's homes. And we had a dinner with a bunch of digital CXOs where one of them described where the company wanted to do that, and the IT department said, no, we're not doing that because it's beyond the purview of the company. And the internal IT guys just said, we're not doing that. And I guess the unspoken threat was that, or you go find a new team to do this because we're not doing it. And so I think that there is this blurring of lines, right, between where do I work, when do I work, what am I exposing and not exposing to people? And a lot of it is subtle and done in ways that you wouldn't normally pick up until somebody, you run afoul of something and then somebody's like, hey, you were watching Gilligan's Island at 2:00 on a Wednesday,
So, speaking as an employer, and I've had this discussion now with several.
An avid fan of Gilligan's Island, right?
Marianne or Ginger or Professor. Anyway, let's not go there. I've spoken to several employers about this, and I've read a lot about it. As I sit here today, there's not a doubt in my mind that you're more productive when you have a group in the office rather than working at home. I think for all of our Slacks and Teams and all that stuff, a lot more gets done in an office. However, as part of pandemic tech or just pandemic culture, I think a lot of people now are very comfortable working at home. It's not that they don't work, it's not that they don't get their work done. They work when they want, how they want, from where they want. Mm-hmm. And so it's like an asynchronous workplace versus a synchronous workplace. But I think what we're going to find is that a synchronous workplace is much more productive than an asynchronous workplace. Now, every employer I've spoken to, and I've spoken to some who are large enterprises, many like myself who are, small, medium businesses, I think we'd all prefer, if we have the office space, that people congregate and work in person, assuming we're not all catching COVID from it, right? Taking that off of the table. But I think we're also afraid, because talent is so scarce, that if we impose that, people are going to vote with their feet and say, I'm going to go find another job where I can work from the beach or Hawaii or wherever I want to work from. God damn it! And then how do you replace those people? In a small company like this, it's probably a little easier to replace those people than it is in a large company that needs a lot of highly skilled people.
I think it sits between the two. I think there's times when there are certain tasks that you need to do or you need to focus. Where working at home can be a lot better than working in the office, because in the office you got people popping by in and out, and whatever individual crisis of the day is happening happens. Where the async thing falls down most is the sharing of domain knowledge and expertise across different groups is very difficult, even in the Zoom age and asynchronous. And so if you have people who come on, it takes them longer to ramp up. You don't have that accidental knowledge sharing conversation that goes on. And it's an intangible, but it does over time make a big difference.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's true here at Techstrong even. So I think there's another part of pandemic tech we haven't spoken about, right? And that is the bigger digital transformation story. Instacart, right? I was reading somewhere that they put their IPO off or something like that, right? But technologies like Instacart, curbside pickup. Man, I love curbside pickup. Why didn't we have this my whole life? What were we thinking? That kind of thing. Shopping more online, right? There was a time where I really wasn't into buying clothing online because you couldn't touch it, feel it, try it on. You had to try it on. It didn't fit. It's a pain in the butt to return. I don't go to stores to buy clothes anymore. So when we talk about pandemic tech, I think about the enabling, not the privacy issue or controversial ones, but how it's already kind of worked its way into our everyday life, where these are the things we take for granted now.
Sure.
Yeah. I think sometimes, though, we in the U.S. are pretty far behind other countries on that digital transformation, and things that we're marveling about, people in other countries are kind of laughing at us about, like, dude, we were doing that 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
You walk around South Korea, you would take a picture of a wall and shop off your phone, and that stuff would be sitting in your house before you got off the train.
Yeah. Well, no, certainly so. Yeah. But again, I was in Spain and Greece. It still amazes me, though, that over there, even though they have good internet, good stuff, they still think we have great things here. Like, somehow we still, we're superior when it comes to this. And I spoke to a few people who said, no, we don't. Not true.
Don't give it away.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I was, just giving away state secrets. But, we're not all that advanced, believe you me, right? My internet stinks. But, yeah.
Well, I also think that we've kind of been craving a lot of these new technologies that, the Instacarts and the online shopping and the ability to do curbside, things like that. Obviously, the pandemic accelerated that. But I do believe that had the pandemic not occurred, we probably would still be where we were 3 years ago.
Right, because this is accelerated. Yeah. I mean, just think about things like working out, right? We've seen Peloton go up and Peloton go down. But, standing in the mirror and having the person be your trainer, that's pretty freaky, right? When you 5 years ago,
it's lonely though, too.
Well, that's the other flip side to this, right? And we're starting to see it, unfortunately, with mental health and suicide rates, and maybe it has something to do with all the mass shooting, and all this is people working at home become isolated. No matter how zoomy you are, it's not the same.
If your best friend is the digital trainer from Peloton, you need to get out of the house.
Get out of the house.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, this has been a great discussion, but I think we probably went a lot longer than we were supposed to. But I hope you at home enjoyed it. Mike, Charlene, any last words?
No, I enjoyed the heck out of this discussion. I hope we can do it again soon.
Yep.
Tune in next time. That's my last word.
All righty. Hey, this is Techstrong TV Today. We'll see you soon. We're live at RSA this week, so check it out.
CISO Talk. To hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. Kicking things off, Red Hat is working with the U.S. Department of Energy to containerize supercomputing. According to an article in the Register, Red Hat is collaborating with multiple U.S. Department of Defense laboratories to promote cloud-native and integrated in high-performance computing. The collaboration will work to use containerization to link HPC and cloud computing, which could unlock a new level of efficiency for the Department of Energy. Specifically, Red Hat will be working with Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and Sandia National Laboratories. At the Berkeley Lab, Red Hat will look to enhance Podman, a container engine used for developing, managing, and running container images on a Linux system. Sandia, where Red Hat has been contributing for years, will try to run Kubernetes-based infrastructure at massive scale, pushing the boundaries of the platform. And at the Livermore Lab, Red Hat will bridge traditional HPC jobs with the modernized cloud-native jobs, bringing HPC job schedulers like Flux into the mix. Overall, Red Hat's collaboration with the Department of Energy could change the way HPC workloads are handled and lead to other entities to integrate containers into their supercomputers. And according to Global Newswire, 3 companies are teaming up to offer wider cloud computing possibilities for health sciences applications. Atos and UCL announced they successfully ran Viridian, the virus sequencing tool used to detect a mutation of the SARS-CoV-2 strain of the coronavirus. The success was facilitated by the use of ARM's Ampere Ultra processor in a cloud-native environment with Atos's integration expertise. The Ampere Ultra processor is dedicated to cloud-native workloads, meaning the simulation and the results can be accessed from the cloud or on any HPC platform from anywhere. Together, Atos, ARM, and UCL may be able to advance precision health and speed up the development of drugs and other health industry processes. All right, in other news, Microsoft is sharing mitigation measures to block attacks exploiting a zero-day flaw on Microsoft Office. That's according to an article on CyberTalk. The bug is an execution vulnerability of the Microsoft Windows Support Diagnostic Tool. The flaw, first reported by Crazy Man Army of the Shadow Chaser Group, impacted all Windows versions still receiving security updates and was being used by threat actors to launch PowerShell commands when opening or previewing Word documents. By exploiting the vulnerability, an attacker could install programs, view, change, or delete data, or create new accounts. The first attacks exploiting the bug began over a month ago, using different invitations and threats as lures. Microsoft has offered a workaround to block the attacks, allowing users to disable the MSDT URL protocol. In a 3-step fix offered by Microsoft on its website, users are now able to mitigate the attacks and keep their data secure. Microsoft also recommends turning on cloud-delivered protection and automatic sample submission to identify and stop new or unknown threats. According to the discoverers of the attack, Shadow Chaser Group, Microsoft didn't consider the flaw a security-related issue at first, a decision it has yet to justify. All right, in other security news, the FBI is blaming Iran for an attempted cyber attack on Boston Children's Hospital. According to CNN, FBI Director Christopher Wray alleged that Iranian government-backed hackers were behind an attempted attack on the Boston Children's Hospital, a 400-bed facility and one of the most renowned pediatric centers in the country. The hack took place in June of 2021, and although the FBI stopped the hackers before damage was done, it exemplifies the threats posed by hackers around the world. The attackers exploited software from Fortinet, which controls the hospital's computer network. The FBI got a tip about the Iranian hackers from a valued partner within the intelligence community. That's according to Joseph Bonavolanta, who is a special agent in charge of the FBI's Boston field office. No ransomware was deployed, but the incident did prompt the FBI and other agencies to issue public warnings of Iranian government-backed hackers targeting organizations in the healthcare sector. All right, over on Container Journal, KubeCost is launching an open source project to rein in Kubernetes costs. The project OpenCost was developed by KubeCost and is centered around monitoring and optimizing spending on Kubernetes clusters. The project was submitted to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation for approval as a sandbox-level project and is now available as open source software. Founding members of the project include KubeCost, Adobe, Armory, Amazon Web Services, D2IQ, Google, MinCurve, New Relic, and SUSE. Alex Thielen, who is the head of business development at KubeCost, says it is the right time to launch OpenCost because more Kubernetes management platforms are providing cost controls. Since its development by Stackwatch, KubeCost has raised $25 million to build spending-based Kubernetes tools and applications. OpenCost is designed to run inside a Kubernetes cluster, and data can't be sent out of a cluster without user permission. KubeCost estimates that organizations can reduce Kubernetes-related cloud spending by 60% to 80% without impacting app performance with the increased visibility offered by OpenCost. And we wrap things up with another Container Journal article, this one about ways in which enterprises can govern surging Kubernetes use. Although Kubernetes is efficient, Kubernetes initiatives aren't always successful, as managing multiple clusters usually requires some level of governance. One solution to governing Kubernetes at scale is centralization. A DevOps team could centralize to set standard company-wide usage patterns or create a cloud center of excellence, a standardized centralized governance function. Easy for me to say. Another solution could be through blueprints. By using templates to create and share standard configurations across clusters, companies can quickly fill clusters with relevant tools for regulation. Another idea is lifecycle management, which implies staying up to date with patches and protecting the software supply chain. It is also important for policy systems to be enforced to promote safe practices. Open Policy Agent is a tool set many organizations are using to enforce cloud-native policies. With the proper governance in place, clusters can be run efficiently, taking the pressure off developers and accelerating the DevOps process. All right, that is it for the headlines today. I'll be back soon with another batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here with Dan Clark, who's the president at Trujillo. Dan, welcome back to Techstrong TV. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Thank you for having me back.
Awesome. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about, I believe last time you were on, we did talk about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So this time we're going to be talking about the Cybersecurity Model Certification, Maturity Model Certification, but this is version 2.0. And so interested in talking to you a little bit about what's different in this one and what contractors and subcontractors to the Department of Defense need to be aware of this time around. But first, why don't you refresh our memory as to what Trujillo does?
Sure. So Trujillo is a joint development between InterEdge, where I'm president, which is about an 1,800 person software development company focused on security predominantly, and Intel, where I used to be an executive. And we came together almost 6 years ago now to create a platform for compliance, originally around privacy compliance for things like CCPA and GDPR, that has since extended into many other areas, things like in the medical field for HIPAA compliance and into the finance arena, and as well, more recently, our first foray into government compliance with the CMMC.
All right, great. So let's talk about that. We've been hearing about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification, the CMMC, for contractors and subcontractors, as they kind of want to work with the government, they need to actually kind of prove their mettle, if you will. So Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification is one way for basically kind of a stamp of approval, correct?
Yeah, it's really the only way. Yeah. And it's changed a lot from the prior incarnation, which we called CMMC 1.0 to today's CMMC 2.0. And there's been quite a bit of consolidation, alignment with industry practices, but really the biggest thing is the government is much more serious about enforcing this. So the previous CMMC model is something that if you were a high-level contractor, a direct contractor of the government, certainly you were being compliant with CMMC. But all of the subcontractors, the hundreds of thousands of businesses, they might have technically been in scope, but they weren't being held accountable to that. There was no real enforcement on them. With CMMC 2.0, it's very clear that there's going to be strong enforcement, even for those subcontractors. So what that's done is it's taking us from a scope of maybe 10 or 20,000 companies that are the big government contractors that were kind of always in scope of it. But you've added now every single vendor that they have. And often they have hundreds or thousands even of subcontractors of vendors. And these companies now have come within scope of CMMC 2.0. And that's really the big change on the horizon with this.
It sounds like a huge endeavor, because if you think about all of the third-party vendors that these contractors and subcontractors deal with, I'm assuming we're talking about everybody from their IT services firm, maybe that they're subcontracting with like a managed services provider, all the way up to maybe even their HVAC technician, or even maybe their vending machine supplier, anything that's connected, right?
Literally, we have one that is a coffee supplier to one of these large contractors. And they're, at the very low end of sophistication, but yet they have access control to be able to get in and out of a building. And so they have actually a fairly sensitive amount of information, kind of the middle of the sensitivity, as opposed to many of the other ones that have come in. If you supply, muffins to a military base, your food supplier, anybody in the supplier chain, you're now in scope of that too. You'd be sort of the lowest level in that case. But many of these companies are now at sort of the mid-level, and they have very little experience in it. And the big change isn't for those sophisticated companies. It's for all of those companies that have kind of been swept into it. My former company, Intel, is one of those companies that they're not a direct government contractor, but they certainly supply to all those government contractors. So they're kind of some big companies that are caught up in this sweep as well.
So are we going to see maybe cottage industries kind of cropping up around making sure that these third parties to these contractors and subcontractors actually become kind of compliant and fall under the CMMC 2.0 umbrella, so that those guys, the contractors and subcontractors, can be compliant with it?
Yeah, there's no question that has sprung up now. There are probably thousands of small independent firms that are providing assistance to these companies in order to just walk them through what we call the objectives, which are kind of the questions, and the principles, which are the kind of the higher level elements of it. But you have to walk through this, and you have to ask them, hey, what's your password policy on your Wi-Fi? Who posts your public information about your company? And it's not just typically one question. Okay, so who posts it? How do you decide who gets to post the information about your company on your publicly visible website? How do you review that? And then you have to upload what are called artifacts or proof that really is your policy, that every employee is aware that that's the policy, that you're keeping it up to date. And there's a large number of companies now that are struggling to come into compliance rapidly, because you really need to do this, sometime this year. And we have a tool set for this that we've developed with Ignite. But for most companies, they really are going to those small consultants and saying, hey, walk me through the spreadsheet, walk me through the questions, walk me through the objectives. What does this mean? Well, I don't have a policy on who gets to post my public information. And interestingly, as we went through this process for our own company, that was one we didn't have. So
really?
We're like, that's an interesting one that who does, like, I guess we need an actual process and procedure that makes sure that we understand who gets to post that public information. And so I think most companies will find it's not just an exercise in documentation. You actually have to think this through. Mm-hmm. And so that cottage industry is what's walking people through it. It's interesting, though, there's really nothing in between, I think, other than our tool set, which is why we built it. There's large companies that do this. Mm-hmm. If you're one of the big main government contractors and you're going to spend a couple $1 million a year on CMMC compliance, there's very, very, very good software and support for that. And then there's sort of the cottage industry of, I'm just going to walk you through the questions. I'm going to walk you through the spreadsheet. And there's very little in between.
So I have to wonder then, if we're talking about these other companies, such as the coffee supplier, I mean, that's a great example. I mean, do you think these guys are going to be saying it's not worth the effort? I'll just not work with those people. Or do you think that they see enough value that, just going through this exercise of becoming CMMC compliant, will that maybe force them to rethink their business processes in general? And do you think that they'll see it as a positive, or do you think that they'll see it as just too much for them to want to have to deal with on a regular basis?
I think that's a good question. And I think it depends on the individual company. But I think the vast majority of them are going to land on, we have to do this. And I think the reason behind it is that the consequences can be quite severe. Mm-hmm. And the consequences, what we've seen is, if you really are interacting with the Department of Defense and you might get audited, then there's really no question you have to do this, because any money that you get from the Department of Defense after the time you said you're compliant up until the audit is actually at risk. So your entire revenue of your company is potentially at risk if you fail. But I actually think the reason that companies are doing this is because of new contracts. And if you talk to the big DoD contractors, what they're saying is that it's just not worth the risk for them. And so all of their vendors, what we've heard pretty consistently from the Department of Defense, the large contractors, is they're telling all of their vendors, hey, look, you got till the end of the year, or in one case, we've heard November. So there's a little bit of time to a little cushion. You have till November to get in compliance, or there's no new contract for you. And if you're that coffee supplier, if your business is 99% not contractors, and this is your one outlayer, okay, maybe you're going to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? That's not what we're hearing, though. What we're hearing is the people that serve these companies, this is often 100% of their revenue, or certainly the vast majority of the revenue. So I think the main reason that you're going to see really, really strong compliance in this is because of just essentially withholding contracts. You do bring up another question, though, which is, does it help with your general sort of cybersecurity hygiene? Mm-hmm. And I think it unquestionably does. What's driving that, though, is more about cyber insurance renewals. We went through our own cyber insurance renewal recently, and the vendors wanted to see what was essentially a CMMC attestation. I mean, they didn't call it that. They used the NIST standard, but it was very, very similar. And so you had to really go through and ask yourself the questions and get the whole company has to get involved. I think that's a very positive exercise for the company, because as you know, I mean, cyber is not just a possible threat, or a vague threat. I mean, this is a real problem for companies. And all this is doing is assessing your level of hygiene, your level of compliance, and your level of risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think that today's cyber landscape is such that, that there are so many threats out there that it really behooves every company to have a real cybersecurity strategy in place, not just, we'll throw up a couple firewalls and just do password managers and everything will be fine. Now, I think that companies of all sizes really need to come up with a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy, whether it is to meet CMMC 2.0 requirements or just something altogether, just good business practice. But it'll be interesting to see what the CMMC, the next iteration, what 2.0 is going to, how it's really going to impact these third parties, whether there's going to be any fallout from it, if we're going to see, massive changes in contract renewals or, what have you. But so where do you think we are with even moving beyond 2.0 into 3? What might we see moving into the future?
So there is a government body that's evaluating that right now, and they're talking about aligning. So one of the big changes with 2.0 was they really made a strong effort to align to industry standards, especially NIST. Mm-hmm. And the foundational level doesn't really align very well, but the mid-level, which is by far the most common, aligns very well to 800-171 NIST. And what they're saying is that the top level, which isn't released yet, they're gonna try to align to the NIST 800-172. They're also saying that really the foundational level, the lowest level, is always just self-attestation. The mid-level is a mix. It depends on the kind of information you have. In some cases, you can self-attest. In some cases, you can use a third party to verify you. At the top level, what they're saying is third parties won't be able to certify that. Only the government themselves will be able to certify that. And I think the change is because they've really turned this into a pyramid where you've only got a very, very small number of companies. And I think this is the right answer too. I think they did the right thing here. There's a very small number of companies at the top, and those probably should go through a detailed audit by the government. We probably all feel better about that. Yeah. Whereas what they've done is they've kind of cleaned up a lot of the lower level and the mid-level, so they have more time and attention to focus on that top level.
Oh, that's great. Well, I look forward to having a 3.0 conversation with you when that comes down the pike, because I think this is a very important topic, and I don't think that cybersecurity firms, or actually any company, is really, I'm sure they're aware of it, but I don't think it's really getting enough conversation around it. But I think it is a definitely a move in the right direction on behalf of the government to ensure that we are more secure. It's going to take some time, obviously, but you always got to start somewhere. So I think the CMMC 1.0 and then 2.0 and whatever we see in the future is a great way to go about doing it. But Dan, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your insights. It's always a pleasure to have you on Techstrong TV.
Well, great. Thank you so much for having me again. And I agree with you. I think CMMC is a step in the right direction. And I think it's really because your cybersecurity is important. There's so many threats out there. It's so common that you really do need to think about this. It's not just an exercise in futility, and you shouldn't view it that way. You really should view this as something that's important to your company, and this is a mechanism to kind of walk you through it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks again for your time. I do appreciate it. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech Conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Nathaniel Quist, who's a principal researcher at Palo Alto Networks Unit 42. Nathaniel, thank you so much for getting on the Zoom and having a conversation with me today. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charlene. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the Unit 42 Cloud Threat Report, which I know is not a new thing with you guys. It's is it an annual report that you guys put out?
Yeah, it is an annual report. This is number 6. The past few years, we've actually done 2 a year, but we're now spacing it out to do once a year because the amount of data that goes into these is pretty complex and pretty specific to key topics. So we're making more time for a specific topic, which will be great.
That is great. I'm sure over the last couple of years, you guys have seen some serious changes or serious, evolution, maybe, shall we say? And it's I can't imagine that what we saw pre-pandemic is now happening post-pandemic, or because I'll never say post-pandemic. Scratch that. I didn't say post-pandemic. We'll call it the new normal. But digital transformation, all those factors that came into play at the beginning of the pandemic, I know are, kind of wreaking a little bit of havoc and making some changes in the ways that organizations are utilizing the cloud these days. So let's talk about some of the threats that you guys are seeing. As you said, this is the sixth one. How did you guys come about gathering the data?
Yeah, I mean, some of our previous topics, every report has a specific topic. The last report was specifically about supply chain, very hot topic, especially in cloud infrastructures with previous threats like SolarWinds and the Nobelium group that was behind that. But identity is really the key crux or the key threat that we see facing cloud environments. Within this particular report, we wanted to focus on asking three questions and finding answers to them. And those questions being, who is targeting cloud? How are they targeting the cloud? And then what are they doing once they have targeted, or what kind of operations they're doing? So to kind of answer these three questions, we took real world data from real organizations. It's not surveys, it's actually real hard fact data. We looked at over 680,000 different identities across 18,000 different accounts, across 200 different organizations, specifically looking at identity and its use, misusage, and attack surfaces that it opens up for attacker groups. Key findings are that we found that nearly every single cloud organization or organization using cloud infrastructure is producing or using overly permissive policies for their identity. Individual identities having more access than they actually need to use in order to perform that function. In essence, not following least privilege practices. They're exposing cloud instances at extremely high rates, so 62% of organizations doing that. And what's really kind of the key fact of this report is that we produced an industry-first cloud threat actor index, which is enumerating actors and how they actually operate within cloud environments. And they are targeting identity specifically across the board. So it's a key factor. It's a really important conversation to have. And so that's what we wanted to focus on with this report.
Well, I think that's a very, very important topic, because we keep talking about not only the number of human identities that are that have too much access or over accessed, or however you want to say it. There's also a whole lot of machine identities that are on the networks now that might also have more access than they need to be able to do what they do effectively, whether it's a printer or an IoT device or something like that. So do you see this as being a much larger problem, year over year, or is it something that's just kind of always been an issue, but now we're kind of getting around to addressing it?
Well, I mean, I think there's two parts to that question. Yeah. In the general idea, having identity misuse or over permissive has been a thing that organizations have faced well before cloud, and will probably continue facing it for a long time. But within cloud specifically, there's a level of complexity that is introduced within cloud. Things are much more machine-oriented and dynamic. So, they're created very spontaneously and very rapidly. And that complexity makes it difficult to manage and maintain identity effectively within cloud. So using automation is that key piece that we want to look at within cloud, and how do we automate security effectively. So ensuring that the identities, the policies, and that we use to create identity permissions within cloud are secure from the very beginning. So kind of like that shift left mentality to keep things more secure from the beginning. We'll make sure that attack surface stays smaller and less sprawling, where attackers will have access to get into these more areas of the cloud infrastructure than they need.
So do you think that this is an issue of folks just not understanding the implications, or do you think it's more about, I don't want to say they just don't, they don't know, they don't know the scope of the issue, or they do see it and they just don't care, or they don't know how to go about changing these permissions, because, as you said, the cloud is a much more complex environment.
It is, and I would really hate to say that people don't care about security or don't want things to be secure, because I think that's very far from the actual reality. But that complexity is difficult. When we start looking at how to organize permissions for identity, it's almost impossible to do it manually within cloud. If you try to do it manually, it's more likely that you could fail, unfortunately, to do it correctly, or you'll have that human error. That's where programs, platform security tools like a Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, or CNAPP for short, makes it easier, because it allows that gets the human out of the aspect, so we don't misread something or mistype something or have a typo. Have a machine read machine language and make things easier and faster from the beginning. That shift left, that infrastructure as code scanning, securing from the beginning will be a whole lot easier. And I think we just need to have that education aspect, having these conversations like you and I are having now, to get the word out that identity is a real threat that attackers are looking at. And there are tools, there are knowledge sets and skills that we can encourage the growth of to make clouds more secure.
So where do you see, based on this report, where did you see the biggest issue with identity and access management in the cloud? Were there certain, was it at the infrastructure level, or was it, some area of the cloud that seems to be, kind of a hotspot, if you will, for this?
So again, the subtitle of our report is Identity Access Management, or IAM, the first line of defense. We can put a lot of security controls on top of cloud. We can put a lot of tools and things to make things work faster and more easier and more automated. But it's really that identity piece. And when I say that the most organizations, so nearly every single one of the 200 plus organizations we looked at, are overly permissive when it comes to how they produce identity policies. They are more often than not using administrator access or owner access for their roles. Makes it easy to deploy, makes it easy to use cloud infrastructure and cloud resources, because you just give them everything they need to do in order to perform that service. And there's no issues, right? You can easily stand up and start running. So there's a balance that needs to be taken between ease of use and security. And right now, all cloud organizations are leaning more towards ease of use, and they're just opening up that door wide open for anybody to take that identity and run with it. So we're seeing cloud threat actors who, a very direct trend from crypto mining in the past, so like Team TNT, Watchdog, Rock, Kinsing, these are all groups that we've talked about that are part of the Cloud Threat Actor Index. They are all crypto mining operations. They mine cryptocurrencies. They make money using it that way. But we are seeing them, evolve or expand their skill set, directly targeting cloud platforms, specifically using identity to spread their more crypto miners. But they're gaining more access to cloud environments. They're gaining more access to all of the resources that are behind it, because that initial identity that organizations are using, that overly permissive set, is so wide. They're using administrative rules to do that. And it's just something that we need to, really clamp down on and ensure that we're narrowing that scope.
Yeah, no. And when you're talking about crypto mining, it's funny because there seems to be two camps when it comes to whether crypto mining is really a threat. Some people say, it's not going to harm my data. It's not going to harm my personal information. Guys want to go in and use my whatever, It's running in the background. It's not. And then there are other people saying, well, wait a minute, I'm paying for all this cloud usage. So I'm basically paying their electric bills and their internet connectivity bills and all that. And so, yeah, this is a big deal. I need to get rid of it. So I think, when we're talking about an education, I think we need to start talking to people about really the crypto mining is a threat to your network, regardless of whether you think that it's going to infiltrate your data and extract your data and your personal information. It's on your network. I mean, and it's something that could be, could actually open the doors to other threats on the network.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, the bottom line is it does affect the pocketbook first. I mean, cloud service providers charge by how much computational usage resources using, an organization is using. And that is directly what crypto mining is. It's using computational resources to perform its function. And they're not paying for it. So they are stealing your resources. They are stealing your money, and they're making their own money on top of it. But that's just the first line. I mean, they're spreading, they're growing. They want more crypto mining in their environment. So in order for that to happen, they are stealing identity of that particular compromised cloud instance, whatever it may be. And they're trying to create more of those. So in order to do that, they have to gain persistence into that cloud environment, create new identities, and then create new resources that are on top of that. That is, I mean, if you just think about it, just what I just said, they're stealing identity, they are creating new users, and they're creating more resources. So if they can create more resources, they can certainly modify, change, or delete the resources that are already there. That's the real thing that we're looking at here, that these cloud actors will have this capability.
Yeah. And it's, and I don't think there are enough people who actually kind of connect the dots there. It's like, once you're in, they can do so many different things. So real quick, before we wrap things up, were there any other findings in the survey that really kind of stood out for you?
Again, this is real world data. It's specific to cloud organizations. These are real events that are happening. We're seeing that identity is being, I wouldn't say forgotten about, but it's not being taken seriously enough. And we want to impress upon organizations that the cloud service providers are providing the infrastructure, right, to do these things. But the configuration, modification, security of the resources that you put on top of that, your specific VM machines, your specific databases, those configurations are the organization's responsibility to secure and maintain and harden. So using tools that will help you do that, CNAPP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, using cloud workload protection, using cloud security process management. These tools help us automate the security finding. So using these tools to harden your identity, increase automation in your environments is really the key piece. There's so much data inside of this report that I can't go to every single little bit, but it is truly a deep dive into how identity works and how we're using identity in cloud. It's a good piece of writing, I would think. All right,
so well, there you go. So how can people get their hands on it?
Sure. You can go to cloudthreat.report, and that will direct you to Unit 42's Cloud Threat Report, specifically on identity and access management.
All right, great. Well, Nathaniel, thank you so much for taking the time and kind of talking me through the report. It's a great topic and very relevant, and it's one that I think more people should be talking about. So thanks again. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Well, I got 3 here for you that are coming up in the next week or 2, and hopefully you'll be able to mark your calendar and join us. All right, what do we got? First one is Common Kubernetes Challenges Solved. This one is happening Thursday, June 9th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Fairwinds.
Kubernetes is hard, and it can be easy for imposter syndrome to show up when trying to figure out how all of the different pieces fit together and interact. This happens over and over again at organizations at all stages of maturity. This talk covers common patterns and mistakes to help other companies get up to speed and succeed with using Kubernetes. So topics to be discussed include how to think about deploying to Kubernetes, how to keep everything organized and deploy to Kubernetes at scale. Security, vulnerabilities never stop, so how to keep an eye on these and resolve these issues. Keeping Kubernetes current, deprecated APIs, out-of-date Helm charts, and more, and scalability, or how to deploy resources to a cluster in a scalable way while thinking about security, efficiency, and reliability. Definitely one must-attend webinar if you are dealing with Kubernetes. All right, the next one is called Getting Started with Chaos Engineering. This one is happening Tuesday, June 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Gremlin. Creating resilient software is a fundamental necessity for modern cloud applications and architectures. As systems are increasingly distributed by design, the potential for unplanned failure and unexpected outages increases significantly. As a result, many organizations, big and small, have embraced chaos engineering. This webinar will give you an in-depth understanding of what chaos engineering is, why it's crucial to prevent outages, and how you can use it to build resilience into your own systems. All right, the last webinar for you today is called Why Cloud Native Applications and APIs Are at Risk. This one is happening Tuesday, June 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This one is sponsored by, by Bionic. Like every other organization, you probably have some sort of cloud transformation initiative. Whether you are just starting on your own cloud journey or you have fully adopted a cloud-first approach, there are a lot of things to think about. But have you thought about how to ensure the applications deployed to your production cloud environments stay secure and configured correctly? This webinar focuses on helping attendees understand the gaps in traditional cloud security tooling, learn about the types of risks your cloud-based applications and APIs are prone to, and explore new approaches to finding risk in your cloud-based applications and APIs. Another good one there for you. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me and next time when I will have a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, we are back. Next up, we've got Mitch Ashley again. In this one, his interview, he's talking to Aaron Newcomb, who was the Director of Product Management over at Sysdig, and they talk about the Sysdig Advisor offering, which is brand new. It simplifies and accelerates Kubernetes troubleshooting. Certainly a great technology for organizations that are adopting Kubernetes and having to deal with the complexity of Kubernetes environments. This is they're here to help, Sysdig. It's a great conversation as well, so let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I have the great pleasure of being joined by Aaron Newcomb. Aaron is Director of Product Marketing with Sysdig. Hey, Aaron, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing, Mitch?
I'm doing really well. I enjoy talking with you, so I'm even better. Thanks for joining me.
Excellent. No problem.
Hey, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you. And for folks that might not know too much about Sysdig, give them sort of a little bit of an overview, because we'll get into, I think some really cool things that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with kind of an overview of Sysdig. So Sysdig is a security and monitoring tool. So we're a company that really focuses on DevOps, SREs, folks that are doing, concerned about the security of their environments in this new world of Kubernetes and cloud native applications that you need to monitor. So that's where we focus our efforts. We try to help our customers do that easier, better, more effectively in this ever-changing world. And we really do focus on those two areas. So we focus on security, which is a huge area for customers that seems to never change. And then also we focus on monitoring, because Kubernetes, containers, Prometheus, all of these new technologies that companies want to use to deploy their cloud native applications, monitor their cloud native applications. I mean, that's, if you think about it, that's all really changed in the past 5 to 10 years dramatically. And so that's how Sysdig got started, is we knew that there was a need out there to help customers understand their environments better, so that their applications can run faster and without error.
Cool. And how about your background? Just a little bit about you.
Oh, I've been doing this a long time. So I go back to the days of, Sun Microsystems, and worked at Oracle for a little bit. And lately I've been working at companies like Sysdig that are into the cloud native space, doing monitoring, worked in the APM industry for a while. So yeah, I've been doing this for quite a while. And as you mentioned up front, I'm director of product marketing for our Monitor product specifically.
Awesome. Thanks. Good. It gives a little bit of context. Well, tell us a little bit about, I know you had a recent announcement, or fairly recent announcement, talking about Sysdig Advisor, but you also had a study that you did earlier this year, some really interesting data around, we all know Kubernetes is complex, but unless you're into it day to day, you don't necessarily understand really how complex or what some of those challenges are.
Yeah, that's true. So we did a report that we put out every year, and it's called the Sysdig Cloud Native Security and Usage Report. And it goes over those two things, similar to our product lines. And the reason we do that is because we can collect all this data from our customers and analyze it. And so it's a little bit different than a survey, which is kind of people's opinions and how they feel about how they're doing. And, you might not always get real world data out of that. You might just get, well, I had a bad week last week, so my opinion right now is that things are, up the proverbial creek without a paddle. But what we do is we actually focus on that user data in the report. And so we know exactly how many clusters people are running, how many namespaces, how many pods, what kind of tools that they're using. Are they using Prometheus? Are they using, JMX or StatsD to collect their metrics? And we also know a lot about their security posture. So we know, are they leaving backdoors open? Are they running containers as root? And those kinds of things. So the report is really useful. One thing it told us, though, or confirmed for us, is that this space is complicated and getting more complicated. That's the first thing, right? So we know that containers live on average, I think it's 44% of them we found in the report live less than 5 minutes, and 20% of them live less than 1 minute. So when you have an infrastructure that's changing that rapidly, you can't really rely on the old tools anymore to monitor those environments, right?
There's no golden master in the Kubernetes world, right?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. And we also know that people are deploying more. I mean, this shouldn't be a surprise for anyone, but we've seen a step up year over year in the number of containers that people are running. And the size of their environments is increasing every year. So it's definitely, I think, become the norm now that when you want to start out and deploy a cloud native app, you turn to Kubernetes for orchestration, and you turn to Prometheus to monitor those things. Now, that brings along a whole host of problems with it, right? Because it just like I described how fast things change in a Kubernetes environment, when you have a problem, that problem gets exacerbated, right? You're not just looking at the 10 servers in your data center, right? As you go down the row of servers and looking for amber or red lights anymore, right? To see where the problem is. Actually, your environment is changing so fast that you need help to be able to figure it out. Because now if you imagine spending, let's say you're really good at Kubernetes and you spend 10 minutes to fix a problem, right? Now the problem is you multiply that 10 minutes by 50,000 entities in your environment that could possibly have an issue. And you're spending hours, days, weeks just troubleshooting these environments and trying to figure out what the resolution is when something goes wrong. So that's a huge amount of time that you're putting into this effort.
And you mentioned earlier the stats from your report. I like to use the big fancy word ephemeral, right? Those things aren't there anymore, right? Especially when you're talking even serverless applications. You don't have to do that. You can just talk about Kubernetes and containers and what that environment looked like when this event happened. Even if it was minutes or hours ago, it could be very different than what it looks like right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest probably example of something that exists in this environment, this ephemeral environment, as you say, that didn't exist back when we were working more with VMs and bare metal, is this very specific error condition that happens in Kubernetes called crash loop backoff. It's a great example to give to people because anyone that's had to troubleshoot a problem in the Kubernetes world has seen crash loop backoffs in their environment, right? So it's one of those things that's very common, and people will recognize that problem right away. And it's basically when a container starts up but doesn't get to a fully running state. And the issue with crash loop backoffs are they can happen for any number of reasons. It could be a resource issue in your environment. It could be a typo in a config that you get to a certain point and then there's an error. The container won't start, and then it just starts. It starts from scratch again. It starts from the beginning. It loops. That's the looping part of the crash loop backoff, right? And it can be one of the more challenging things for people to try to troubleshoot because there's so many things that can cause it. And so some of these things that we've been talking about are why we decided to develop a new feature called Advisor in the platform. And it's basically to give people the insight that they need to see the problems that are happening, see the state of their environment, and then take an action to fix that. With guided input from Sysdig. So there's a lot of tools. Let's go back to the crash loop example for a minute. There's a lot of tools that will tell a user that they have a crash loop backoff, right? Even at the command line, you can run kubectl and see that you have a crash loop backoff. That's not the hard part. The hard part is knowing how to fix it. And so what we set out to do with Advisor is to actually tell people where they're having these errors, whether they're crash loop backoffs, PVC full conditions where you have a storage volume that's full, pods restarting, all of these things that are very specific to Kubernetes, show them exactly where those problems are occurring in their environment, what's affected, and then guided steps that they can take to actually fix that problem. It doesn't get them to a one-click fix it type of scenario, but we found in our testing of trying to fix a crash loop backoff the traditional way and trying to fix a crash loop backoff with Advisor, we found that we were 10 times faster at helping a customer get to that resolution of the crash loop backoff than with using traditional methodologies alone, like kubectl, blogs, trying to pull up log information from the container, for example. All of those things take time and can be quite cumbersome. And so you can do all of those things now in Advisor and Sysdig just with a couple of clicks, and it really does speed up the troubleshooting process.
Well, and it sounds it's going to be much more than like a runbook approach. It's going to be sort of a runbook on steroids because you've got all the context of what happened. And it sounds like Advisor is trimming that down to relevant things that are going to help you walk through that process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Here's what's relevant. Here's what's affected. Here's some common things that you can do to troubleshoot this particular problem. Another example of what we're doing to help this process is we're bringing live logs into the platform. So in Advisor, you'll be able to see as you go through the troubleshooting steps that we outline, here are the logs that are happening in a live view. So as that crash loop backoff is occurring and looping, you'll be able to see that the logs flow down, see exactly what happens just before the crash happens. And that'll give you a really good indication right there about where you need to go to fix. Maybe it's, like I said, maybe it's somebody fat fingered a configuration file. That happens all the time. Mm-hmm. And you'll be able to see that right in Sysdig without leaving the environment. So you've got all that information right next to you. You've got the live logs, and you're able to very quickly figure out what's going wrong and how to fix it.
Very cool. Now you announced this, I think, around KubeCon time back in Valencia, Spain. Is this available now, or is it coming out at sometime in the future? What's the status of that?
Yeah, so the majority of Advisor is available now. We're going to be adding the troubleshooting bits specifically in a matter of weeks. So that'll be there very, very shortly. But if you went and looked at the product today, you would see Advisor, you would see troubleshooting. You'd be able to go in and take a look at your environment, either at the cluster level, the namespace level, the workload level, or the pod level. That we have a really nice tree that allows you kind of to jump back and forth and see, oh, here's what's going on in my cluster. Click the cluster and you get cluster relevant information. Then you dig down a little bit deeper get to the pod level, all of a sudden the information that you see changes automatically, and you see all the relevant pod level information, like things like pod restarts and alerts that are specific to a particular pod. So it's really nice for exploring. When you have a problem, you get that alert that comes in and it says, hey, I've got a problem in this particular namespace. Very quickly, within a few clicks, you can see all of the resources that you have allocated there, all the running workloads and pods, all that information is front and center right in the product, really easy to get to. The things that I were mentioning before, the things like a stack ranked priority list of the errors that are occurring in those environments, and the things like live logs, like those are the things that will be coming in just a few weeks. So stay tuned. By the time this gets out, it'll probably be very close to being available in the product.
The lean incremental delivery. That's right. The world we live in now, right?
We follow the DevOps methodology ourselves. So we'll be releasing these things incrementally over the next few weeks.
One thing I kind of feel compelled to ask, just because there's, the rumors about recessions or whatever at times, and there's a lot of discussions of startups and funding and all. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I know from my experience that brings up financial conversations, cost savings, time savings, what are those kind of things, and it never hurts to be prepared for that conversation anyway when you're talking about either new product or new incremental feature that you're looking to acquire. If you're providing all that information or that context and more guided to resolution, I have to believe that's going to improve, response time to repair, things like that.
That's right. So, we mentioned how long these things can take and how many errors you can have in a typical environment. The faster you can resolve those, the more time you can spend on other things, right? So if I can devote, let's say, 20% of my time to troubleshooting instead of 80%, now I've got a big bulk of time that I can maybe go work on performance, improving performance, or optimizing the environment, or like you say, optimizing costs. So one thing that we do provide today, and we've done this for a while now in Sysdig Monitor, and it's right up front in Advisor actually, is your capacity of your environment. So you can take a look at a namespace, let's say, or a cluster, and you can see, I'm only using 20% of my CPU, and I'm only using 40% of my memory. Well, that's huge. That means you might be able to go scale that environment back and reduce your cloud spend, right? Assuming you're hosted in an AWS or a Azure or Google, right? Mm-hmm. So you could go back and say, you could right-size those environments a lot easier than perhaps with a DIY effort, because all that information is front and center. And you can actually measure it just like with any tool, right? You can measure it over time. And you can see like, hey, this environment is creeping up the way that we thought. Maybe we'll let it run for a while and see if we are optimized effectively. Or you might see that for whatever reason, this environment is actually trailing off and there's a lot of empty or a lot of overhead there. Perhaps we can shift some of our workload onto that platform instead of standing up a new cluster or a new namespace or what have you. Let's optimize that environment first and hopefully optimize our cost. One of the things that we showed in that report we mentioned earlier is, if you start to calculate these costs out over time, it can really add up quickly. In fact, we found that just based on the average utilization we saw from actual customers, a customer might be able to save over $400,000 a year on their cloud spend simply by going in and right-sizing their environments and make sure their utilization is optimized.
Interesting. And with the increasing growth in containerization, Kubernetes, cloud-native applications, as you were saying, it's not only not getting any easier, it's getting more complex, but it's getting bigger, right? And that's part of that. Part of the challenge is, we can't. Everything's so big now you can't keep it in your head, and now you can't even keep some of the information about what's happening, in one place in your head. You really have to rely on some really kind of intelligent tools to help you get to the answer.
Absolutely. And then of course, we're talking about Advisor today, but you can imagine how this same discussion applies to security as well, right?
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah, this exact same thing is true with security, is that as the environments get more complicated, there's more opportunity for configuration errors that might leave a backdoor open, or, just plain, I don't want to say laziness, but, when you have so many of these environments, it's easier to just, let's say, give root access to everybody, right? Because that's the easy path. Or maybe that's what we did in development. And then we just didn't fix that when we deploy to production, right? That we see that happening, and that's in the report as well. So yeah, it has implications, a lot of cost implications, right? Implications from having to do a lot of extra work to patch up your security issues, and implications in not being optimized on your cloud spend.
Very cool. Well, great. It's been a pleasure talking with you about this. Where can folks either find out more, maybe download that report, try things out? Where can they do that?
Yeah, just go to sysdig.com. We do offer a free trial, which is great. I mean, that's how I actually was interested in the company at first. That's why I joined. Was I actually took the free trial before I was working here, and I learned all kinds of things in the first 30 days of using, that during that free period. No credit card, no nothing. I was blown away by how much I learned just by using the tool, and that's what sold me on Sysdig, and I wanted to go work for them. So I encourage anyone that's interested in checking out either Advisor or some of the other features that we offer with Secure or the Prometheus managed service that we offer. Just go do a trial and see if you learn anything. If you do, great. We can go from there.
Perfect. All right, Aaron Newcomb, thank you so much. Pleasure talking with you today. Thanks for joining us. And please check it out. It's sysdig.com.
Yep. Thank you, Mitch. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, welcome back. Next up, Mitch is speaking with Blair Lyon, who is the head of cloud at Linode. They are talking about a recent report that Linode contracted with Techstrong Research. They worked together to come up with the 2022 Rise of the Alternative Cloud. And it's got some really, really fascinating findings about the ways in which organizations are viewing the big three cloud providers and how they're utilizing alternative cloud providers. It's a great, great report, and this is a great conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, the distinct pleasure to be joined by someone who's been on Techstrong TV with us before, Blair Lyon. Blair is head of cloud at Linode, which is now part of Akamai. Welcome, Blair.
Thank you, Mitch, for having me. Really appreciate it.
Always great talking to you, and enjoy our conversations very much. We're going to get into some research that we did recently, but for folks that may not know you or be familiar with Linode, tell us a little bit about yourself and Linode, and maybe say a little bit about the acquisition by Akamai, what that means.
Sure. So Linode is a cloud infrastructure provider. We've actually been around since 2003, 3 years even before Amazon launched their public cloud product. So if you haven't heard about Linode, that might be just because we've grown up with the developer audience. We try and make cloud computing simple, affordable, and accessible, really for all, but we really appeal to developers, and we've created a great relationship with them over the years. Now, I think over 1 million developers have used Linode over the years, and we run in well over 160, 170 countries around the world. And one of the things that's been interesting for us as sort of an alternative cloud provider to, let's say, the Amazons of the world or Azure or GCP is that although we have a lot of the core capabilities, it's the scale, which has always been a challenge. I mean, Amazon has tremendous scale, has regions all over the world. And one of the things that we've been able to do now with the partnership and acquisition with Akamai is that we're going to be able to dramatically increase the overall scale of Linode's capabilities, and now provide the sort of continuum of compute, not only from the ability to build on our kind of virtual machines and our storage capabilities, but now also deliver that to the edge using the power of Akamai, and then also, of course, their overall security products. So it's an exciting time for us, and we're getting great feedback from the developers and from the enterprises as well.
We're talking about what a great way to add a content delivery network to your business. So
absolutely,
I got one to add too. So congratulations on that. That's
Thank
awesome. You. Good stuff. By the way, that's how I got introduced to Linode. Is one of my developers going, "Hey, we need to do this," and I set up an account on Linode. Like, "Oh, who's that?" This is way back when, long time ago. Not quite 2003, but I like to say, if you haven't heard of Linode, your developers have. So
exactly. It's really interesting. We have a lot of customers that use us for their at-home hobby projects, and then of course they're now using us more and more in their businesses. So we have this kind of duality of our customer base, which is really cool.
Well, we live in a world very much, developer driven in many ways. Well, let's talk about this. We've done some research before. We did some research with you last year. Techstrong Research did. And looking at what we call the alternative cloud, as opposed to the big three hyperscalers, and we all know, that's a very large market, and really kind of understanding as Linode continues to grow and evolve, the customers that you serve, because those folks are changing too, and that market's growing and changing, more cloud native, more cloud, all of that kind of thing. And we did a update to that research just this quarter, which had some really interesting results. I think one of the just overall themes was there's a big jump in the number of, I think it was around 68% of the respondents. We had 400 or 500 respondents in territory who said they are using multiple providers. We are in a multi-cloud world today. It's just think of an acquisition, right? Poof, now you're using probably more than one if you weren't already. But that is the world. I imagine you see that every day.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just look at our business customers right now, it's well over 70% are using Linode and other cloud providers. So they're already running a multi-cloud configuration. And now to see this in this report as well, in terms of DevOps professionals all around the world, getting to that nearly 70% of them are using more than one cloud provider, I think is great. I mean, this is kind of we've always talked about sort of the trend of multi-cloud, and is it real? Is it really happening? And now I think we can see that it's here to stay. And now the tooling and the capabilities to orchestrate multiple cloud providers is getting easier. And also the cloud providers like Linode are making those connections easier and making it easier to be cloud agnostic, which I think is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. It is. There's some other really interesting things in this too. And by the way, folks can go to the Linode site, linode.com, and download that report. It's free. It's kind of scroll down, it's the middle of the page. You can also get it from techstrongresearch.com, but go to Linode, grab it there. A lot of good stuff in this. And just as some context for folks, when we looked at the responses of kind of who folks were using, the what we call the alternative cloud, yourselves and some others that fit, below in size, the top three hyperscalers. It's a good sized market. I mean, it's essentially, in essence, equal to one of the hyperscalers when you combine it together. So it is a growing segment, and obviously your acquisition by Akamai represents another example of why that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that we've talked to customers about over the last couple of years is as people have thought about using alternative cloud providers, they sort of looked at the market and said, well, whether you're a Linode or a DigitalOcean or an OVH cloud, well, you're only so big. And what you just said is really interesting, because when you sort of pool us together, we're about the same amount of market share that Google has. And so I think, in most of our alternative cloud peers, we all sort of drive the same kind of business model, which is we want to make cloud computing simple, affordable, and accessible. I mean, you're talking half the price typically of a large hyperscaler. You're going to have much, much simpler access to things like 100% human support. You're going to be able to have, in terms of the overall complexity of the platform, it's going to be much, much simpler to manage and to train your staff on. So it's really interesting how that sort of pooled market is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think the DevOps professionals are seeing that and feeling more comfortable in adding an alternative cloud provider into their mix, especially when you're talking multi-cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. The data shows that too. You mentioned 2003, and I remember working with Amazon when it was first coming up, kind of early in that. And that was back in sort of the power ping and pipe days, right? We thought of things pretty simple about co-location, and not simple, but it was sort of the fundamentals of the cloud developing. And you think about how many more services are available to people that are using a cloud service provider, but that's also getting complex. And I don't need everything on the menu all the time. So when I'm going to that great restaurant and paying for the white tablecloth, maybe that wasn't quite what I need. I'm paying for everything else, all the nice paintings on the wall, and to create a bad analogy. But I think that was some of the data kind of bore out that concern.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was one of the most interesting pieces is that especially when you're talking about small to mid-sized businesses that don't need necessarily, quantum computing or other kinds of really extravagant, features or solutions that, let's say, an Amazon AWS is providing. I mean, they have over 200 plus products that they provide, and it's frustrating to think about. Hey, I'm only using core compute, storage, and networking, but I'm paying for or I'm funding your R&D and your development of things that I will probably never use or never need. And that's, again, one of the differences, I think, for alternative cloud providers is we're not going to go chasing those 100 plus services. We're going to provide the core networking, storage, and compute that you need to be able to do 70, 80%, sometimes 90% of most workloads. And that's a fundamental differentiator. Now, you would say, well, I might need things like certain kinds of monitoring. I might need the ability to do other kinds of features that maybe I would get with an AWS. Well, our approach is a little bit different, where we are really trying to celebrate being cloud agnostic and also embracing open source and third-party tooling so that you can be in control of that sort of middleware or that integration layer between your applications and the core infrastructure, so that if you need to go multi-cloud or if you need to swap out a cloud provider, you can do that easier. You're not locked in to those proprietary frameworks. And you also have greater ownership of your application too, which has become a bigger thing with private equity and venture capital firms that are saying, don't go down that road of implementing proprietary technology from the cloud providers because you don't own it, which means you're not going to get the valuation bump for that part of your technology. So DevOps professionals are seeing that today, and they're starting to say, hey, I can roll my own. The open source tools are there for the things that I need. And then the core kind of basic primitives of cloud computing, I can get almost anywhere.
Yeah, speaking of open source, I was at KubeCon just a few weeks ago and had a chance to meet up with James Steele, one of your folks who works at the MSP partnerships. And that's a clear message, open source and the role. I mean, I thought it was important just in building the cloud and kind of creating that initial stack. But it is a vibrant part of the solution set that developers are leveraging, I think increasingly so, as well as commercial services.
I often talk about like the 2010 decade was a decade where we moved from on-prem into the cloud and we sort of consolidated around one cloud provider. And I kind of look at the 2020 decade as the decade of sort of portability and open source. Mm-hmm. And it's great that we're seeing it with our customers, but more and more DevOps professionals are seeing that as well. And we're also seeing it from the MSPs and the other service providers, that they see that they can provide digital transformation services, security services, infrastructure services, not just by implementing proprietary tooling from the cloud providers, but using the primitives, being open source minded, being portable, trying to think about a cloud agnostic strategy. And that provides real value. And that also allows them, I think, to be a more value add service and stickier for those customers.
Mm-hmm. A little more control over your own destiny too, I think is part of what you're saying.
Yeah.
There was another interesting, and please download the report because there's a lot of great stuff. It's free. Just give us a little bit of information and it's all yours. One of the things that really kind of jumped to the top was a concern around your cloud provider, service provider, being or potentially being a competitor to your business. So speaking back to how things evolved from some of the primitives to the complexity of today, how did you interpret that message that came out of the data?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that we often hear with our customers, like, well, why are you working with Linode or why are you working with an alternative? They're saying because that's all that you do is cloud infrastructure. You don't sell shoes, you don't sell books, you're not in the pharmaceutical business, you're not in these other businesses. And that's a good thing because I don't want to work with a partner that's also competing with me on the side. And so we've heard this now for years, but now to see it rise to this level in terms of what we're seeing in the survey, where over 50% of DevOps professionals feel that their cloud provider is either competing with them today or soon will be. And that's higher than I've ever seen it. So I'm not sure exactly what's driving that other than kind of the things I've already talked about, but it's really interesting that that concern is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And that's why, multi-cloud is a good thing. You don't want to be single-threaded through one of these providers that's, in all these other ancillary businesses. And that's really our approach. And one of the reasons why Akamai invested in Linode is to create this sort of, pure play cloud provider that's not in these other ancillary businesses, that you can, if you want to use our CDN technology or our security technology or our cloud compute technology, you can, or you can use combinations, or you can use multiple. So we see that as the future. We see that flexibility and agility being where the market's going. And we want to be able to provide another alternative, now at a much higher scale, solution to the market. And if we see this trend continuing, hopefully that's a good sign for alternative cloud providers like us.
And as I remember looking at the data, it was almost about half and half between who already saw cloud providers a competitor or potential competitor. So it wasn't just a fringe people that saw it. It was a good portion of the people that responded that way. It was really interesting. Maybe it's something we get a chance to dig into further on down the road if there's opportunity. So, one of the things that always comes up, I'm curious your perspective, is the ever-changing landscape of security. And, I know that's important to Linode, and it's important to your customers. And security has kind of evolved from that rack and stack age, what we used to call the pizza boxes. We put it in our colos or in our private containers. We do some of that. But there's the whole software stack now. Infrastructure as code, all the security, all the way into API security, and it's everywhere. It's part of everything we do. It truly is a horizontal piece of that. You as Linode, how do you think about security with your customers and what's important to them?
Well, security is a combination of things. It's a broad topic. Of course, there's a shared responsibility. The cloud providers and the tech providers have responsibility to, of course, secure our infrastructure, secure our locations, provide secure APIs, things like that. And then, of course, on the customer side, you have the responsibility to use passwords, use things like two-factor authentication, be able to think carefully about who you provide access to your infrastructure or to your application. So it is a shared responsibility, and there's some great frameworks out there. And we've written a lot about different parts of that, and also things about different pen testing and other kinds of things you can do to sort of validate your security stance. So it's one of those things where I don't think it's kind of like a evergreen kind of thing. Like you're always going to be working on it. You're always going to be sort of battling against on the negative side of people trying to infiltrate your systems or infiltrate through your people. And so I think you just have to be extremely vigilant. You have to be careful and thoughtful about the approach that you have with the tools and the partners that you choose. And of course, look for those best practices whenever and wherever you can. One of the other things that I do talk about sometimes, if you have the perspective on it, is to keep things simple. The broader your sort of attack surface, or the broader your kind of platform you have, of course, the harder it is to secure. And that's one of the things that a lot of customers do like about alternative cloud providers, is because our platforms are relatively simplified. That means our attack surface is much, much smaller. Let's say the broad, edges of, let's say, an Amazon AWS. So we don't spend as much money on security that they do, but our attack surface, of course, is much, much smaller. So it's just another thing to think about.
Kind of that old adage of, pick the things you're going to do and do them really well, right? Don't try to be all things. But I mentioned it because in the survey and the research, there were kind of 4 top areas of what are some of the capabilities that are most important to you from your cloud infrastructure provider. We always think about things like performance, technical support being super important, right? Price performance of things. That's been, of course, something we have evaluated for a long time. But data security came out actually as the number 1. Technical criteria. 4th on the list, in between price performance and technical know-how, was API security. That's really, and programmatic access to that. That's really risen a lot on people's radar. We see it a lot in our research, the topic of API security. So I know those are important areas for you all. But you think about the multi-cloud environment, you've got data in all these places, and what's where, and is it, how good is the security in one location versus another, and how does my provider treat that? Because it is a shared responsibility model, but ultimately, me as the customer, me as the data owner, it's kind of my neck on on the chopping block if something happens. So I need to be working with the right people.
I think you want to be able to trust your provider, and you want to be able to have a clear conduit to be able to communicate with their support, be able to ask questions, to be able to really understand how the sausage is made, so to speak, like how things are connected, how things are developed, and be able to have kind of a clear view of anything in there that I can understand in terms of what would potentially be a security issue. It's one of those things where I do hear that sometimes in terms of sort of these black box or these proprietary services that I can't really see or control, like what's going on underneath. And I think that's why a lot of folks like to roll their own. They like to be able to have open source tools and other tooling that they can really see transparently into how these things work, and they can run their own testing, their own security approaches against it, and be comfortable that they have a better handle on it. They're not just necessarily trusting some other third party.
Excellent. Well, just about out of time. I mentioned that the report is available on the Linode.com site. Just scroll down. I think it's about midway through the kind of second half of the page on the left-hand side, the current version of the site. You can also go to Techstrong Research, get it there. Where should folks go to get more information? Is the Linode site, I imagine, is a good place? I know you have some free offerings and some things that
one of the things
accessible.
One of the things that's nice about alternative cloud providers, especially Linode too, is it's free to try. And we have a wealth of technical guides and how-tos and documentation that's not Linode specific, that just helps you solve your issues or helps give you new ideas to drive the innovation of your applications. So go to linode.com/docs to be able to see a lot of that documentation that's free for anybody. And if you just go right to the main website, the homepage, you can spin up a service typically in a minute or two, and that's free also. We give $100 free credit for the first 60 days. So if you have an idea or you're thinking about looking at alternatives, or you're just kind of on the beginning of your journey in terms of developing your application, you can give Linode a try or any of the other alternative cloud providers, because we try and keep it as simple as possible, and we're always going to be there and have your back if you need us from a support perspective.
Excellent. Blair, great talking with you again. We look forward to having a future conversation. Appreciate you joining and speaking with our audience today.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Great seeing you.
Great seeing you. Thank you. Blair Line, who's with Linode, now part of Akamai, and head of cloud, if you will, cloud environment. That's a big title. That's a big job, Blair.
Absolutely.
So I wish you all the best. No, congratulations. Good stuff.
Thank you very much.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, we are back, and rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we have a conversation that Mitch Ashley had at the recent KubeCon Cloud Native Con 2022 in Valencia, Spain. He spoke with Stephen Chin, who is the VP of Developer Relations over at JFrog, and they discussed JFrog's new open source decentralized package manager project called Persia. JFrog announced it over at KubeCon. It is a great, huge step forward in the package manager space. And Stephen and Mitch parse out all of the different benefits of Persia and all of the different features and ways in which organizations can adopt Persia. It is a great technology, as I said. It's a great conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I have the great pleasure of being joined by Stephen Chen with JFrog. Steve, good to be talking with you today.
Cool. No, this is awesome to be interviewing and actually be interviewing in person because we've been on panels and
what is that? You mean you're not Zoom? Oh, okay.
Doing all this stuff over Zoom. So this is amazing.
It is. It's great to be in person with you again. So for folks who don't know about JFrog, I can't imagine there are a few people maybe that don't. Tell us about JFrog and your role there, and then we want to get into some really cool news.
Yeah. So I'm the VP of Developer Relations at JFrog. For those who haven't heard of JFrog, we're the binary company. We deal with package management, security, deployment for all of your Docker containers, different package types, over 30 different package types now, Artifactory supports for the ecosystem. And I've just been having a blast at JFrog because I love the founding team. I love the technology we build. And I love the fact that we support and develop a bunch of interesting open source projects.
Artifactory was kind of my introduction into DevOps way back when DevOps was just kind of DevOps, but good stuff. Well, let's talk about, you have some really exciting news on the security, supply chain, software supply chain security, and maybe some open source work.
Yeah, so we just announced a new open source project, which we're doing in collaboration with Docker, with Deploy Hub, with FutureWay, with Huawei, and with some other companies. And this is our view for what developers, DevOps, and the entire DevOps ecosystem needs to secure the open source supply chain in the future. And I think we've seen over the past year just an increasing number of supply chain security attacks. At JFrog, we've seen our security research team is really, really good. And they keep finding targeted exploits, leveraging dependency injection attacks, namespace confusion, or even malware that's in all the public repositories, which we depend on as developers. And it's really a challenging state of affairs when companies are better funded to protect themselves against and do proper security defenses than the open source projects they depend upon. So the attackers have realized if I can't go in the front door, guess what? There's people with trucks that are shipping in food and supplies in the back. And I'm just gonna like put little viruses and
hijack our way in, right?
Hijack through the food services or whoever else is going through the back door. And unfortunately, open source is currently that vector. So we want to be part of the solution for fundamentally solving supply chain security.
Well, it's interesting, a year ago, it's not like supply chain security for software is a new issue, or there haven't been exploits or have, but I think with some of the open source Log4j, for example, that has made, the more public, the wider spread, the impact, now all of a sudden it's on everybody's radar, including the attackers.
No, the way I like to put it is a lot of the stuff that we do as like DevOps experts, you can't go home and tell your parents or grandparents about
That's what I did today.
They're like, well, what do you mean you just installed like a new CI/CD tool? Like, what's CI/CD? But if you tell them that you fixed the Log4j vulnerability for your company, they're like, oh yeah, I saw that in the news.
I don't know what it is, but I heard about it.
So now our jobs suddenly are like our parents and everyone else actually knows what we do for a living.
Maybe your parents, but okay. That's a different topic. Well, so talk about this as, and now you're introducing this as an open source project, but you're also looking to get adopted, right?
Yeah, so basically what Persia is it's a decentralized package manager where multiple companies are running infrastructure that supports a wide-scale peer-to-peer network. So we're leveraging libp2p, which is the same underlying library that IPFS uses, which is kind of the next generation Web 3.0 technology. We're also building it with a transparency ledger. So it's an immutable history of everything which goes into the network so that you have that auditability. You can build SBOMs so that you have security traceability of where all your dependencies are coming from. And it can't be tampered with. So this
you do
means
it blockchain style, or
exactly. So new transactions only get committed if you get a majority of the companies using a BFT or Byzantium fault-tolerant algorithm for the companies with authorized nodes. And this means that it gives you an even higher level of security than, for example, depending upon a central registry where one company backs it or there's a single instance. Because now an effective attack against the network means you'd have to take down over a third of the nodes in the network, which is technically infeasible if it's a good architecture, if the companies running it have good security standards.
A much bigger bar, a higher bar to meet.
Exactly.
To bring it down.
I think if you look at the sort of infrastructure we have in our companies and which support our enterprises, we put a lot of investment and a lot of technology behind it. Open source doesn't get the same love. I mean, we should, as open source developers, you should have secure infrastructure. It should build your software in a way which is reproducible and can be verified across the network. It should be a distribution system which is fault tolerance, peer-to-peer enabled, so it doesn't go down, so you don't have outages. And you should just be able to rely on a high level of security from the network, where whatever you pull down as a package or a binary is exactly what you would build yourself from source.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So why this approach and why now? Was it inspired by things that are happening over the last few years? This is an idea that's been cooking? Is it the research and what you're seeing for the kind of attacks that are on the rise?
So I think that the reason for why now is security. We're also going to be donating this to the OpenSSF Foundation, which is a foundation focused on open source supply chain security. And I think when you look at the criticality of open source infrastructure for the entire ecosystem, we both need to fix what we have today. So we're supporting and doing a bunch of improvements to our own central repository, Conan Center, for the C and C++ community, for the OpenSSF efforts on securing other repositories, on having volunteer folks to help open source projects improve, dashboards and security researchers for fixing this, but also looking at what's the next generation infrastructure, which is going to support open source communities to have a distributed, peer-to-peer, secure, decentralized way of distributing open source software. And we think Persia is the answer to that in the future. This will be the next generation technology that helps open source developers secure themselves in a scalable way.
And I made this mistake. It's not Perseus, it's Persia, which tells the origins of the name.
Yeah. So Persia is a reference to the Greek system for communicating over long distances. So per for pyro, and they had torches, so they would have an array of two arrays of 5 torches, so 10 torches total on a mountaintop. And then they would communicate using the Greek alphabet with a 5x5 grid, so they would know what letter they were sending. And if you think about it, this was a large-scale distributed communication system in the Greek Empire. And I think this is kind of the same leap we need to make technologically to secure open source software in an open, transparent, scalable way, backed by companies like JFrog who care about the community and the ecosystem and want to make a more secure, developer-friendly environment for us all to build our next generation pipelines in.
Yeah, I get JFrog. You mentioned Deploy Hub, I think, is one of the contributors. But you also mentioned Huawei, and that brings up a couple of questions that I wonder about. First of all, as one of the major equipment suppliers, technology suppliers into networks and all kinds of technologies across the world, the integrity of that obviously has got to be very high. also being a Chinese company, that brings, of course, some nation states are favorable or not favorable to adopting technology. And I know you can't speak for them. I'm not asking you to. But it seems like this might also help to some degree of we're not putting our own backdoors in our code, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we're doing with the project is we're building as a pure open source project. So there's an open source repo on GitHub. So github.com/Persia. The website's open source. All of the IP and everything we're contributing to OpenSSF. And I think that it shows a huge level of support that we have companies like Docker. Our first target is doing the best support for the container native ecosystem. So the fact that they're coming on board, they're supporting with their Docker certified images with integration with the Docker command line and building that tight integration is huge. And FutureWay and Huawei are jumping in, and they actually have some really interesting technology to support secure Docker containers where they're entirely isolated from the host environment. And this allows you to securely build the images in network such that it's impossible for viruses or the host machine tampering to affect the output result of what you're getting on the network. So it adds an extra level of security on the builds which you're receiving from the Persia network. So I think that this is something we all need to contribute in to improve the state of open source supply chain security. There's a bunch of bleeding edge technologies which we can and should be leveraging to take advantage of this. And with the support of all the companies I mentioned and more who are interested, I think that we can kind of shift where we have the technical advantage over the hackers and the attackers in the network, where it's just as hard to attack the open source supply chain as it is to attack any large scale corporate network.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you mentioned too about that of being able to trust the information that you're getting from that not being compromised by the environment that might also itself have been compromised.
Exactly.
That's a huge benefit right there, because now you know you're getting accurate, trusted information, not everything is suspect because of one thing being suspect. Mm-hmm. So, well, Steve, great stuff. I'm excited to see where Persia goes and its adoption, and Docker and Deploy Hub and Huawei, and I mean the companies you've got working with you, JFrog. It's fantastic. Sounds like you lined up some good players to be part of this community.
Yeah, no, very excited about the announcement, and it's been great chatting with you. I mean, this is awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us today on Techstrong TV. We look forward to the next time you are with us.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we are back and we are closing down today's Techstrong TV broadcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversations. We had a lot of them. I hope you enjoyed them as much as I did, bringing them to you. And we stay tuned because we're not going anywhere, folks. We're going to switch over to the RSA show. We're going to be doing some live stream interviews there today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday. So please do keep it tuned to this station, and we are going to be bringing you lots of great interviews throughout the week at RSA, as well as some maybe some tidbits here and there. And we're looking forward to being in San Francisco, and we hope you'll be able to join us on site. And if you're not there, at least tune in and see what we've got going on. We'll be back Friday with a regular Techstrong TV episode. It will be a repeat, but we will have the regular format back. And then next week, we will be with all of our regular episodes. So like I said before, we're going to be live streaming at RSA this week. Really excited about that. And so please stay here. We'll have some more interviews for you. And otherwise, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.